Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Life is weird sometimes. Going through life thinking everything is normal. Nothing bad could ever happen. Not really. In retrospect, that was an ignorant thought. I know better now. No one is safe anywhere. Sure, I don't live somewhere generally known to be dangerous, like the Middle East, where violence is as normal as eating butter on bread. But living the city life can be just as risky, easily. Danger takes a different form. You never know when you will be naturally selected to experience it firsthand. I've been living in the same townhouse for 5 years, and nothing bad has ever happened. Every day was the same. I would start my day at 6 a.m. sharp, stumble down the stairs, and make my morning brew. After a quick shower, I'm dressed and pulling the car out of the garage. I work in an office, the usual situation. It's what you would expect it to be. Computers, cubicles, internal corporate domination over a gaggle of underpaid and overworked average individuals. 9 hours later, I drive to the store, pick up my glorified organic food, and come home for a quiet evening. Nothing truly bad ever happens. Maybe a stubbed toe, running over the curb every now and then. Occasionally, the toilet becomes inconveniently clogged, resulting in an overreacted act of unclogging and a sigh of exasperated relief as the water finally swirls away. I've been spoiled and jaded all at once, living such a peaceful existence. People don't think that way so often anymore. Peace is valuable. I miss it. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, minding my own business with a book and a steaming cup of tea, when something moved by my window. I didn't see anything definitively, but I knew the rosemary bush planted under the window had shaken. It was just about 6:30, so the sun was beginning to set, creating the mistiest gentle blue, pink, and purple hue across everything the light touched. My eyes focused on the window, pausing in a frozen stare to see if it happened again. Nothing. I shrugged and returned to reading fabulous facts surrounding our climate and what should be done about it. A black shadow crossed my vision, and again the bush shook, and I turned back to the window quickly. It barely rustled and then became still, as though its disruptor decided to occupy elsewhere. Well, that's interesting, I said as I set the book down. I went to the window and looked out curiously, hoping to see a bird of some kind or maybe a squirrel. There was nothing of interest besides a grasshopper stretching out its legs. A simple rosemary bush. The doorbell rang, which made me nearly jump out of my skin. I stared at the door, a sense of anxiety building. I wasn't expecting a package nor any visitors. This struck me as strange, and I considered not answering. The doorbell rang out again, followed by 3 steady, heavy knocks. Something doesn't feel right. I'll go look out the window upstairs. I thought this out loud, hopping 2 steps at a time up the stairs and peering out the hallway window, exposing my front lawn and a large blue van parked in my driveway. No signage, just a neat, almost new, unmarked blue van with black tinted windows. Tires were dirty. It looked like dried mud. This was strange, considering there wasn't any rain in the area today, and my home isn't near any forests. This is the city. We have cement grass. 3 more knocks sounded downstairs. This person did not want to go away. But seeing this van, I felt uneasy. There's no way I'm opening up for someone with your vibes, whoever you are. I mumbled, continuing to peer, hoping the unexpected guest would leave and I could see who wanted me to open the door for them. Long, stressful moments passed, and the knocking finally ceased. A pale man emerged from my entryway. He was tall, with a fluff of blonde hair bobbing as he slowly strode to his van. Wearing a black shirt, pants, belt, shoes, and socks, he appeared nearly ghost-like. He stopped in front of the door to the driver's seat. He just stood there, staring into the van. Was he talking to someone? I couldn't tell to be sure. Was there another? Why are they here? Why is he still standing there? Why isn't he leaving? These thoughts rushed me. Anxiety continued to crawl into my mind as leeches seeped into my skin. Seeds of panic began to grow as the pale man slowly turned his head back to the front door of my home. His steady gaze slowly climbed the wall, and time seemed so surreal. Eyes focused with an intensity I've not seen before. Up to my window, looking me in the eyes. My mouth fell open in surprise and I lurched away quickly, letting the curtains fall back into place. My heart was slamming in my chest now. He knew I was watching. He knew where to look. How did he know what window to look into? How did he know? How did he know? I took a deep breath and moved back to the window on my hands and knees. I felt foolish, crawling like a child, hoping my parents didn't catch me sneaking into the kitchen at bedtime. I peeked through the smallest possible crease in the curtain to look outside. The van was gone. It vanished like it never existed in the first place. I didn't hear the van start up, no squeaking tires or clang of metal, just nothing. What the fuck was that? I got off my knees, ran my hands through my sweat-laced hair, and let out a flustered breath, taking in another shallow one as a poor replacement. I peeked through again, staring intently at my lawn. I felt my courage come back to me, giving me energy. Nothing is out of place. I know they were here. This is weird. Going downstairs, I checked the windows just in case. Also, the back door. You never know. I looked at the front door. Locked, of course, but I was curious. Unlatching the lock, I opened the door and stared out into the world. A beautiful setting sun, a quiet suburban street. A cozy doormat displaying the cheesy domesticated welcome message, "Who's there?" A duo of colorful owls to emphasize the joke. And a rosemary sprig sits lightly on top of the biggest owl's face. The next day, things were normal for the most part. My morning routine was the same, nothing out of the ordinary. I had a dream about the rosemary sprig. Thinking back, I wonder if my subconscious was more in tune with my surroundings than I was. Coming home that night, I scanned the roads for the blue van with the muddy wheels. The roads were congested as usual around the 5 o'clock rush hour, but no blue van. I pulled into the driveway and looked up at the window I was standing in the day before. The curtains were closed, as I would always have them. Today, I did leave a light on upstairs to give the impression someone might be home, just in case they came by while I was gone. Once inside, I brewed my tea and took a nap in the living room. My eyes thickened behind closed eyelids. They became so heavy the blackness overtook me as I drifted into a relaxing sleep, the smell of fresh hot tea wafting under my nose. I awoke to an abrupt bang with a startled gasp. It was dark now, with just the lamplight illuminating my small living room. I sat up in the chair and listened to the now silent house. My breath caught in my throat as 3 hard knocks rapped on my front door at a slow, deliberate pace. In the same way they had come from the pale blonde man that had come the day before. I felt my heart skip beats as I fumbled in the drawer next to me for the pepper spray I bought at the dollar store 2 years ago. Hopefully pepper spray doesn't expire, I mumbled, fumbling with the little plastic switch to activate the release just as the knocking began again. Peeking around the corner, one eye gets a clear shot of the front door and blonde tresses shining so clearly under the porch light through the faded glass. Crap! I crawled on my knees through the living room and kitchen, hoping he would disappear. As I settled on my kitchen floor, I breathed in and out rapidly. It grew silent. Long moments passed again. I stayed on the floor, trembling with the pepper spray locked in my iron grip, ready to spray the hell out of anything that dared try to hurt me. The clock read 10:32 p.m. on my stove. My eyes stayed glued to that clock for what seemed like an eternity. The neon green numbers eventually ticked to 10:33 p.m. and I let out a breath I forgot I was holding in. This is not good. I thumped my head against the cabinet and sighed, taking in the heavy silence. Click. There was a clicking noise now. It seemed so close, but I couldn't place its source. Click, click, click. I tilted my head, scrunching my eyebrows together as I tried to concentrate. Click. I honed my ears in on the new, unwelcome sound. Slowly turning my head, I looked up at the back door in my kitchen, leading into the yard. Click, click, click. I watched the doorknob twist and pop back into place, and my eyes nearly bulged out of my skull as I realized I was in a new level of danger. This person was trying to break in. At this point, 911 was in my immediate future. I lunged for my phone sitting on the counter. I dialed the emergency line and hid in the pantry, delicately clicking the door into place with as little sound as possible.
911, what's your emergency?
She sounded bored, like this was her first call in hours, and she'd just been sitting at her desk, flipping through Cosmo with a rock star to get through the night. Some freaky man is trying to break into my house, I whispered with alarm, dropping the cell phone and picking it up quickly. The speaker piece was in my ear, and I tried to speak into the hearing piece. I flipped the phone around in a panicked rage and heard the operator mid-sentence.
Unlikely. So are you sure they're trying to break in? They aren't just a telemarketer?
I could hear the rustling of plastic, followed by the operator munching on something crisp. What? Yeah, I'm sure. Telemarketers don't even... Oh, just never mind. Just send someone, now. A loud bang echoed through the kitchen outside of my hiding place. I peeked through the pantry slats at the man standing in my kitchen, the back door hanging limply off its hinges. He loomed with an energy that exuded ominous and treacherous intent. Looking around slowly, turning this way and that, he surveyed the area. He didn't have any bags. It didn't seem like he was going to take anything, which only meant he wanted something else. After a prolonged period of silence, the man spoke.
Where are you?
He said this in a voice that reminded me of a sinkhole filled to the brim with poisonous snakes, hissing and slithering all over each other to collect heat for their cold-blooded bodies.
I know you're here, or I would not be.
He settled his hands together behind his back and openly walked about my kitchen, peeking into the hallway, the bathroom, and up the stairway before returning to the kitchen. A sickly wide smile beamed across his crooked, cracked, and broken teeth.
You cannot hide from me. I can smell your fear.
He stood there, legs apart in a dominant way, with his hands relaxed behind his back, smiling. I clasped my hand over my mouth to steady myself. I didn't want him to find me or even have the possibility to hear my breath. 2 tears betrayed my waning bravery as they trickled down my cheeks and stuck to my chin. My body's violent shaking allowed the droplets to pop to the ground as the man turned to the pantry door. He tilted his head to the side.
There you are.
I let out a frightened gasp, and he laughed in what seemed to be a sick and twisted delight.
Come out, so we can play.
He coaxed, taking slow steps towards the door, head still cocked to the side, at an angle that made me nauseous. In this moment, there were 2 options: fight or flight. Being a young girl in her mid-20s, having never experienced anything similar in her sheltered life before this moment, running made all the sense in the world. The pale man's slender, bony fingers gripped the doorknob of the pantry and opened it with a rush, a loud slam erupting into the room as the door smashed into the wall. I screamed as loud as humanly capable and lunged out of the pantry, armed with a neon yellow mop that I swung furiously, like a panicked monkey gone bonkers at the zoo. The mop cracked the man in the head, and he cried out in rage, stopping the mop in his grip before I could strike him again. Releasing my impromptu weapon, it bounced on the tile, and I sprayed him in the face with pepper spray before running through the living room into the main hallway. I fumbled with shaking fingers to undo the lock on the front door. Tears streamed down my cheeks and blurred my vision. I could hear his agonizing screams.
You fucking bitch!
He wiped his eyes and bumped into walls as he attempted to follow me. A lamp crashed somewhere behind me. I punched the door in a frightened rage. "Open, damn it!" I shouted, banging on the knob and finally getting the lock undone. I swung open the door and didn't look back as I heard the glass embedded in the door shatter. I sprinted down my driveway, right past the dirty blue van and into the street, screaming my head off for help to anyone who could be listening. Footsteps plodded behind me, trailing along my path onto the main road. There were no streetlights or cars, just me, this bizarre pale ghost of a man, and the darkness of the night. I sprinted up the hill toward the main intersection of Maple and Warner, where streetlights fully illuminated the road, and a convenience store gleamed like the lights of heaven just on the other side. I can make it. I just need to get there, and I'll be safe. I just need to get there. I huffed, my legs aching as I pushed them to continue sprinting up the hill. I laughed in exasperated joy and relief when the convenience store came into view. I didn't even stop at the intersection. I kept running. Off the sidewalk, into the street. I didn't even see the blue van speeding toward me. Before I could stop, the blue van collided and slammed me into the windshield. My body rocket launched down the street in a flurry of glass shards, like something out of a poorly produced action film. I landed into an old oak tree with a sick, crunching thud. And the last thing I saw through the blurring, bloody remainder of my eyes was someone getting out of the blue van. The pale blonde man. How? He was right behind me. How did he do that? As I slipped into the black abyss of unconsciousness, I saw another figure emerge from the shadows. The figure came into the intersection's light and stood next to the pale man. Both men stared at my mangled mess of a body mashed against the old oak tree. Both men smiled, a sick, toothy, broken smile, followed by giddy laughter. They were the same. They were both the same man. Completely identical in every way. How? They walked toward me in sync, and the world sank into darkness. The next day, things were normal for the most part. My morning routine was the same, nothing particularly out of the ordinary. I dreamed about the rosemary sprig. Thinking back, I wonder if my subconscious was more in tune with my surroundings than I was. Coming home that night, I scanned the roads for the blue van with the muddy wheels. The roads were congested as usual around the 5 o'clock rush hour. I sat at the intersection just before turning onto Maple Drive. I stared at that street sign until my eyes ached. I felt like it was important, but I needed to figure out why. The same street sign was there yesterday and the day before. Nothing special. The light turned green, and I made my turn. There was not a blue van in sight. I pulled into the driveway and looked up at the window I was standing in the day before. The curtains were closed, as I would always have them. Today, I did leave a light on upstairs to give the impression someone might be home, just in case they came by while I was gone. I've had the strangest feeling inside me all day, like I'm dreaming while wide awake. I sat in the driveway for a while, scrunching my eyebrows together in quiet contemplation. Today went so well, but why do I feel like something has changed? No. Something hasn't changed. This day, it already happened? No, that couldn't be true. But why do I remember this? Well, it's not like I don't do this daily. I talked to myself as I unlocked my door and took one long glance out at the world before closing the door. Once inside, I brewed my tea and took a nap. I blinked awake groggily some hours later, the moon gleaming through my living room window, the smell of settled tea wafting by my nose. Walking through the hallway, I flipped the light on and headed up the stairs to get some laundry started. Closing the washer and setting the dial to delicate on cold, the washer beeped to life and began to process its purpose. Satisfied, I closed the door to the laundry room and turned to the stairwell, freezing mid-step. Standing at the end of the hall was the man dressed in all black, his hands folded behind him, and he stared me down as a pit bull does raw meat. His bloodshot eyes impaled me.
So, we meet again. How's your head? I'm impressed.
The man said with that same broad grin, yellowed and all. The fuck are you talking about? Get the hell out of my house! I shouted, seizing my limited opportunity to back up into my bedroom and slam it in his pale freak of a face. I pushed the dresser in front of the door and tore apart my bedroom, looking for my cell phone. 3 knocks and raps on the door.
If you're looking for your cell phone, Mommy says hello.
The man said through the door, laughing maniacally in his own amusement. I kicked the dresser in response. Eat me, prick! I shouted, suddenly wishing I had listened to my mom and just had the landline phone installed for emergencies. There was a pause, and then the maniacal laughter ripped through the air.
Gladly!
The man shouted and giggled with joy, followed by the horrible cracking sound of wood as he repeatedly beat the door with his foot to break it down. Shaking, I scanned the room for a makeshift weapon. I went into the bathroom and closed the door, locking it. I heard the banging continue as I searched, the sound of cracking wood pounding in my thoughts. Searching through drawer after drawer, I found only a small set of scissors and razors to use as my defense. Fumbling with the razors, I looked up in the mirror for a moment and screamed. There, standing in my shower, watching me, was the pale man. He launched from the shower, laughing as I sprung away from him, screaming bloody murder. He grabbed my shoulder and I took the opportunity to take one of the razor blades and clap around his wrist, skinning him as he cried out in pain. Blood ran down his arm and I released him, running out of the bathroom while he remained there cursing, occupied by his injured arm. Now back in the bedroom, the dresser had been knocked over, and the first man, now halfway, stepped through the huge hole he had kicked in the door. Oh shit, now what? Looking around the room, I spotted my table lamp, and an internal light bulb lit in my brain.
You can't run now. Nowhere to go. Nowhere to hide.
He pulled his other lanky leg through the hole and stepped off my dresser smoothly, staring me down. The other man came through the bathroom bleeding and notably pissed off.
I want the first straw. She cut my damn arm.
He growled my way, pointing at bloody gashes streaking along his forearm. The first man gave him a look and casually waved his hand, and the cut twin grinned and wasted no time in stomping my way, arms stretched and reaching to strangle the life out of me with blood-soaked hands. I backed away in the direction of my nightstand, and when close enough, I reached behind and took hold of the lamp. He dangled me above the ground with a strength I had not expected from such a slender person. He gripped my neck so tight, I felt my face redden with pressure. My eyes bulged slightly, and I began to sputter for air. The lamp was still in my fainting grasp, and I used every bit of energy I could muster to smash him in the face with it. He screamed, releasing me and covering his face as wedges of sharp ceramic fell to the floor, followed by large, seeping pools of blood. He flailed wildly and gripped me by my hair, slamming my head into the other dresser. The flat screen swayed and toppled over with a loud crash. As the first twin joined in, I pulled the scissors from my back pocket and stabbed him into the side of his neck without hesitation. Shrieking, the man fell to his knees and then toppled to the floor, drowning in the blood pouring from his body. The body twitched awkwardly. I stood there, watching him waste away, feeling triumphant. Kneeling, I gripped his blonde hair and pulled his head up. That's what you get for breaking into my house, you piece of shit. I released my grip and let his head smack the floor with an audible thump. As I stood up, I felt hands take hold of the back of my shirt and was instantly reminded I had only won the battle, not the war.
It's time for you to die, not my brother.
He looked me in the eyes for a long moment. I stared into bloodshot orbs filled with hatred of most humankind before he let out a roar of maniacal laughter. Tightening his grip, he lifted me off the ground in one mighty swoop and sent me flying through the upstairs bedroom window. Falling felt so surreal as the world seemed to reduce to slow motion. The second story pulled farther away as I closed in on the cold, hard earth. I landed with a crunching thud, all my bones shattering instantly. My eyes stared listlessly into the moon and stars, taking in the moment before pain destroyed me. Stray pieces of glass fell around me, plenty already wedged in my arms. A large shard jutted out of my ribcage. The last thing I heard were sirens in the distance and the sound of agonizing screaming ripping from my throat as my body collapsed into internal shutdown. The pale blonde head popped out of the broken window above me, waving at me tauntingly, with the same wild grin plastered on his face. I sobbed, salty tears and blood dripping down into my mouth. Closing my eyes, I welcomed my fate. The world sank away into the abyss, and I felt myself release into the safety of death. Birds chirped outside as I woke to sunlight shining through my bedroom window, the news playing quietly on the flat screen. Sitting up, I looked around my bedroom, remembering everything that had happened. The blue van, those psychotic twins, running me over, breaking into my house. The full-on war scene that transpired in the room I sat in now was perfectly laid out as if nothing had ever taken place. Being thrown out the window and dying sprawled out in a bloody, broken mass on the lawn. Dread washed over me, and I felt nauseous. Nothing bad ever happened. Why was this happening now, and why the hell was it happening to me? Why do I remember these things, and how am I even still alive? After a strong cup of coffee and quiet contemplation, I called in sick to work. I wasn't lying. I felt sick in the head. That counts, right? Today was not going to be like every other day. Today, the game has changed. I will not be the helpless victim to whatever time loop hell those twin freaks have unwillingly roped me into. This is my house. It's my game now. Headlights filled the living room as the blue van crept into the driveway just after 10 p.m. The stuttering engine died and the lights vanished into the darkness. I stood in the entryway towards the back of the house, tucked into a corner and out of sight. I waited there, breathing shallow breaths. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted, and crickets made their presence known with their high-pitched chirps. Moonlight bled through the front door. After long moments of silence, the twin shadows appeared silhouetted within the glass frame. Click. It was time. Click. Go on. Open it. Click. Click. Smiling, I slinked further into my hiding place as the lock unhitched and the door creaked open. The twins stood there for some time, staring inside. They stepped into the home, closing the door behind them. Standing in the hallway, the house fell into dead silence. One twin moved with slow steps, and the floor creaked under his weight. The other followed, and the creaking continued as they ventured inside. They passed me and went to the dining room. Emerging from my hiding place, I trailed quietly behind them, tiptoeing along and matching their steps to avoid unnecessary creaking.
Where is she? I don't know. This isn't part of the plan. You suppose she remembers? Maybe another dose just for our report.
I tightened my grip on the baseball bat in my hands and prepared myself to deal out a dose of "get the fuck out of my house," with a side of "dead on my living room floor."
We could bring her to the lab for more testing if her memory did retain the events after going through the time shift.
Testing? Time shift? Who the hell are these people? That won't be necessary, I said, swinging the bat around, bashing the twins behind the head simultaneously, and watching them topple limply to the floor in a crumbled pile of flesh and bone. I stood there a moment, staring at their unmoving bodies, feeling sick to my stomach. Am I part of some weird government testing without even knowing I'm a participant? Can that even happen? Is that legal? Nothing about this was legal in any way. Lost in thought, I didn't notice one of the twins stirring awake. Caught off guard, the man gripped my ankle and dragged me into a painful split, and I cried out in painful surprise. My ankle twisted and cracked under me, and I flopped to my side to release the pressure. He took hold of my shirt and climbed on top of my stomach, pinning me to the floor. The other twins stirred off to the side as he began to regain consciousness. Laughing maniacally, the twin sitting on me tightened a hand around my throat and clenched as hard as he could. I choked and gagged, flailing my legs. Why? I croaked, twisting and squirming to no avail.
Because it had to be you. Too complacent, unsuspecting, nice, naive, perfect,
he said, grinning ear to ear. He laughed again and leaned his hand close to my eyes, sticking 2 fingers out and motioning toward me. The fingers poked my eyes and I screamed, pulling away as best I could and flailing my legs. He persisted and poked deeper. I could hear his fingers squishing around, and I felt blood and God knows what else running down my cheeks. I screamed louder. Using all my energy, I lurched forward and smashed my forehead into his, sending him toppling backward off of me. Leaping to my feet, I ran upstairs, loud banging footsteps following behind me. And I rounded the corner of the upstairs hallway. Pulling the door to the attic down, I swiftly made my way up the ladder and waited in the corner behind the opening for Tweedledee and Tweedledum to follow. I wiped the back of my hand across my cheek. Looking down, my hand was covered in blood. The creak of wood sounded as the twins ascended to the attic. As they entered the attic space, I sparked a match and looked at it with a bittersweet smile. Looking down, I smiled at the gasoline I had poured all over the attic floor. Making eye contact with the twins, they stared at me in disbelief.
What are you doing?
One asked, taking a wary step forward, and I let out a wild, maniacal laugh. Winning! I dropped the match and jumped down the hole to the second story. The attic immediately erupted into flames, and I heard the twins screaming in fear. I pulled the ladder up and closed the attic door, knowing the fire had started in front of their only exit and was rapidly spreading to every crevice it could consume, including the twins. Stomping and screaming ensued above me as I calmly pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911.
911, what's your emergency?
I took a deep breath and said, "Hi, I would like to report a fire at 221 Maple Street. I was driving by just now and it looks like there's a fire starting in the attic. Better hurry before it spreads to the other townhouses." After wiping my face, I slipped my coat on and walked outside as the roof exploded in a roar of flames. I pulled out of the driveway as sirens began to sound in the distance, rapidly increasing in volume as they traveled closer to their destination. Pulling onto the main road, I drove through the evening in silence. I stopped when I was a good 200 miles away and pulled into a lone restaurant in the middle of nowhere, just off the highway. Sitting at the bar, I ordered a cola and some French fries to go. As I waited for my road snack, the news came on with a still photo of a building engulfed by flames, with the headline, "Local house fire triggered by gas, 2 casualties." "Sir, would you mind turning up the TV? I'd like to know more about the fire." I looked at the waiter behind the counter, and he nodded.
Sure thing, little lady.
He turned the volume up, and the news reporter's voice became clear.
10:32 p.m. this evening. An anonymous tip called the local authorities and reported the house fire you can see burning here behind me right now. The fire department is having a grim time extinguishing the flames as they appear to have been triggered by gasoline spread across the attic. What's more concerning is there appear to be people trapped inside the attic. Upon arrival, the screams could be heard from down the street. However, as the flames spread, the firefighters could not reach those inside, and the screaming has since died down. Their safety is currently unknown as the fire department battles these massive flames. More to come as we report live on the scene. This is Rebecca Trulio with Channel 5 News. Be safe out there.
Here's your meal.
The waiter set my drink in front of me with a greasy brown paper bag. I thanked him and left the restaurant. Sitting in the car, I thought about everything that had transpired, about how I spent the last 20 years living the delusion that I was immune to experiencing those bizarre stories on the news. Now, here I am, driving into oblivion, unsure about everyone and everything in my life. I still don't know who those men were or any strange experiments they were involved in that I'm involved in. I don't even know if my memories are mine. Terrible. I can only hope that they are. I am not the same girl I was a few days ago. Experience has a funny way of doing that to people, changing them. This may be a blessing in disguise. I get to start over now. Find a new town far away from here. Create a new image. Be a new me. I'll find a home in a nice area, read my books and steep my tea. I'll go to work and do all the normal things normal people do. And nothing bad will ever happen.
Hey there, freaks and geeks of all ages. Tune on in, we got a hell of a lineup tonight. And don't forget tonight's Devil's Pickins. That's right, tonight at around 3 a.m., we open the floor for suggestions for the next picks for the next hour. I press the button to cue the demonic laugh. The same tired-out track that I'm surprised, of all the calls we got, none of them were about getting a new one. But for now, lay back and relax in your infernal hot tubs, as our first hellish pick for tonight is... The phone started ringing. I tried ignoring it. Hades' Triumph by Severance, followed by... The phone continued to ring. It got to a point where it was drowning out the sound of my voice. I raised my eyebrow, looking at the time. It was only 11:30 p.m., not even time for the nightly Q&A segments, and our Lucky Devil giveaway was the night before. In short, there was no reason for someone to be calling right now. I waited about another half-minute for the damn thing to quit ringing, but it wouldn't. Finally, I rolled my eyes and picked up the phone. Hello, my fiendish little imp. Thank you for calling Reaper FM. Unfortunately, the floor is not open for... Sing me a lullaby. I paused. It sounded like a little girl on the phone. Well, hello there. Is your mother or father around? Sing me a lullaby. I cleared my throat. Little lady, I appreciate you wanting to call me and all, but this isn't the right time to... I stopped and almost chucked the headphones out the station window when I heard the shrill sound of wailing from the other end. Immediately, I smashed the end call button and began panting. I sat for almost a full minute, looking around the room before realizing the damn recording light was still on and picking up my headphones from off the control panel. Forgive me for that, boys and ghouls. Don't we all just hate wrong numbers? I hit the terrified screaming track. Yeah, I bet that is pretty creepy, huh? All alone, dead of night, and suddenly the phone rings when you know it shouldn't, from someone you don't know. But you know that's even creepier. Severance with their hit song Hades' Triumph. Enjoy your little devils, you. I hit play on the song list and sat back. What the hell was that? I thought as the opening riff of the song kicked in. In seconds, the room was filled with overly aggressive guitar riffs and heart-pounding drum beats, followed swiftly by the lead singer's almost trademark opening howl of rage, marking the beginning of the song. With that, my anxiety almost immediately melted away. Howls from below, death in tow, and cries from the deep rousing you of sleep. Before I even knew it, I was headbanging to the music like I used to back in high school. When the wolves howl, the air's so foul, and innocent wombs are plowed, y'all know. To Hades you maggots bow. Even mouth along to the chorus. Hades' Triumph. I was roused from concentration, however, when I heard the phone start ringing again. This time it was somehow so loud that it actually not only stood out from the music, overpowering as it was, but even managed to drown out most of the music. Like the first time, trying to ignore it did me no good because it just kept ringing and ringing. Even when the song ended and the next one that was significantly louder and heavier, by the way, came on, the phone was still ringing. Rolling my eyes, I answered. Hello, my fiendish little imp. Thank you for calling Reaper FM. This time it was an older woman's voice, about mid-30s or so, softly saying, Will you sing for me? Well, you always used to sing for us. Remember that? I paused. Ma'am, I'm not sure what your... The little girl's voice returned. Sing for us. Sing us a lullaby. They both then started repeating the words. Sing us a lullaby. I smashed the end call button again before returning to the soundboard to prep for the Q&A session. I closed my eyes and sighed. Just get through the next half hour, and then it's music again. I looked at the clock. It was 12:45. Wonderful, I 5 more hours till the AM DJ comes, and I can go home and smoke myself stupid till 10 that night. I eyed the mini fridge. Nah, better save the bangs for later. Well, folks, it's that time again. That's right. For the next half hour, DJ Thulu is taking any and all questions, requests, possible deals for the price of your soul, of course. I played the demonic laugh track and sat back. Now, typically, these go one of 2 ways. Either the phone immediately starts ringing off the hook, sometimes before I can even finish my opening speech for it, or I get no calls at all that night. Tonight was the first time, however, that neither was the case. Instead, it was almost 2 minutes, and therefore I wasn't expecting it, before the phone started ringing out of seemingly nowhere. I quickly threw on my headphones and hit the answer button. Welcome, caller, our first of the night. What can Reaper FM do for you tonight? That sound from before, that sound of wailing, blasted through my headphones, damn near giving me a heart arrhythmia. Why do you hate us? The voices from before cried. My body still frozen. I heard the crying sounds build in tempo. Then I could hear the woman's voice shriek, followed by the little girl crying. Ma'am, calm down. Are you? I said, shut up, bitch! Bellowed an almost inhumanly deep growling voice that then began laughing. Ma'am, hello? Are you there? Is everything okay? There was no reply. The wailing sounds also ceased abruptly. I was left all alone, quiet and dark in the studio room. My breathing was unsteady, caught between hyperventilation and heavy breathing. Prone, alert, waiting for the next surprise. Nothing happened. I looked at the time, 1:15 a.m. Another 10 minutes before the music got to come back. At least then I'd have some kind of noise in the background. About 1:20 rolled around, and I was about to announce the Q&A was over and that Pick Siren's Cry by Taurus was up next, when the phone rang again. Now, I almost didn't pick it up, honestly. If I wasn't still trying to build up enough repertoire as a nighttime radio host for my portfolio, I aspired to be a voice actor, and therefore needed to keep my job at the station. I'd have been more than happy to let the bitch ring itself right on. Crank caller, distress, or legitimate caller be damned. Of course, aside from what I just mentioned, the damn phone was just too goddamn annoying to listen to. I picked up the phone, bracing for... Well, I can't really say what I was bracing for. But something. Hello? Hello, can you hear me? The voice sounded panicked like the other two. But it wasn't either the woman or the little girl's voice this time. No, this time it was a man's voice. Oh, please? Someone, anyone, please help us. It hurts so. I began to hear a cloud of static devour his voice. Sir, what's going on, sir? Sir, are you okay? His voice struggled in and out of static, the way a drowning man fights for air. It hurts. He hates us. Please, help. I was about to try and call out to him again, when that deep bellow from before came back as a low, rumbling sort of demonic laughter that grew slowly into a bestial roar. You get what you deserve. Now shut up and... I couldn't listen anymore because right at that moment, all at once, each and every one of the screams came back. The last thing I could hear, in a mix of both the demons and the little voices of the girl, was, "Will you sing me a lullaby, please?" I sat there staring bug-eyed and breathless at my discarded headphones. I reached out, shaking, to pick them up again, when I noticed that they were glowing. I hesitated for a second before continuing to pick them up. They weren't hot at all. In fact, quite the opposite. They were so cold that my arm broke into goosebumps the instant I touched them. When I put them on again, the only thing I could hear was static, low and almost completely indistinct, sounding more like those rainfall ambiances you'd sometimes listen to in order to get to sleep. Well, that is until a couple seconds later when I realized they were getting closer, growing in intensity and pitch until I realized it wasn't static at all, but the screaming again. I started turning a few of the knobs to try switching the station. Funny enough, those were red hot, blistering my fingertips as soon as I touched them. Each and every one of them was like this, too, leaving only the broadcast and the playback buttons able to be touched. I pressed the broadcasting button and began asking if anyone was there and or if they were okay and could hear me. Obviously, I got no answer, other than the ever-growing noise. I noticed, too, that the room started to get extremely hot. Scorching, in fact, to a point where I started feeling dizzy. Not only that, but even the chair I was sitting in started getting toasty on the backside, so I made to stand up only to find that my pants had already somehow fused to the cushion of the seat. I was stuck. There was nothing I could do to escape or make any of this stop. I looked over to the window, intent on shouting, praying to God that I'd get lucky enough to catch some street bum's attention to come and get me the hell out of there, when I realized I couldn't even see the street anymore. All that was there now was a blank void. What the hell? Where's the street? Where am I? How long has it been gone? How could it be gone? My head spun in literally every possible direction. I mashed the broadcast button again. Hello? Someone? Anyone? Can anybody hear me? Hello? Hello, Andrew. My eyes were 2 seconds from exploding in their sockets. I heard the deep rumbling, roaring laughter blasted me from both sides of my headphones, causing my heart to jump. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say hello, DJ Thulu. Is that better? Who? Just your lucky caller for tonight. Hell, I've been one of the station's biggest and oldest fans. I always love hearing your stuff, listening to the music and all. So do the filthy maggots and harlots here with me, as you have no doubt noticed. Huh? Dude, what the hell do you want from me? I hear the laugh again. Well, now that's an excellent question. Though I thought I was supposed to ask you the questions here, as the fan and all. Screw it, I'll humor you. Though the answer isn't about what I want from you, but instead what hell actually wants from you. I started throwing my head furiously around the room. I even peered around at the window again. Everywhere I looked, no one was there. Where the hell even are you? I'm everywhere. I'm inside each and every man, woman, and brat that was vomited up to this hellhole earth since its conception. Huh? Dude, that doesn't make any sense. What are you? Whoa, slow down, Motormouth. As much as I love hearing your voice every night, I'm afraid you're starting to exhaust your good graces with me with all these interrogations of yours here. I mean, for hell's sake, you haven't even given me a chance to answer your last question. You don't normally ask this many questions to people, do you? No, but then again, callers like you doesn't usually happen either. The voice laughs again. Yeah, fair enough. I suppose. Though I think from here on, I'd like to do most of the talking, if that's all right with you, Mr. Thulu, sir. Okay, whatever. Just tell me what you want here. That's better. Though again, I'm not just about me tonight. I'm about what all of hell wants. Now, as I understand it, tonight is Devil's Pickins night, yes? Yeah. What about it? Well, as your longest fans, I think it's high time we cashed in on that opportunity, yeah? But I can't do that yet. What do you mean you can't? I thought that's how this was supposed to work. We pick the songs and you play them. The room was unbearably hot now, sweltering. My breathing was heavy and my head felt light. The room began to spin and I thought I was going to collapse under the panel in front of me. What's wrong, DJ Thulu? Cat got your tongue? The heat of the situation setting in, maybe? I mashed the button again. What are you doing to me? There's so much for letting me do the talking, huh? Whatever, so here's the deal, pal. I heard the laugh again, this time smaller, more of a chuckle than a bellowing cackle. Myself and the others with me, I mentioned before, are going to make a few song requests. and you're going to play them. Got it? Just like every other devil's picking night. I started panting. My vision went cloudy. I could barely even distinguish the knobs from the panel in front of me. Fine, okay, you win. But will you let me go if I do? Well, I am known for my deals, and a deal ain't worth a maggot's rancid turd if I don't hold up my end of them. I'll let you go tonight if you play our lineup for tonight's Pickins. Sounds fair? Yes. Darkness was closing in. My body felt like it would have burst into flames at any second, just out of thin air. Suddenly, though, fresh air started to fill my flaccid lungs again. I coughed and sputtered. Now, you ready for the first pick? Yeah, sure, whatever. Good. Now for this first one, I'm gonna let one of the underlings shoot their shots first. I heard the screams return, with the man's voice returning sobbing. I want to hear you play. What? I can't hear you. I heard the man cry out in pain, with the deep voice roaring at him to speak up and quit crying like a little maggot. But play Hero by Skillet. I was confused for a second. I could hear the groans of agony also pick up in pitch. Then I heard an ear-splitting screech, followed by a sickening squelching sound, followed finally by a gurgling death rattle. What the hell was that? Look, disregard what he just said, you hear? The pious moron has always been a pain in my tail. Both of them. When you try and do something nice for some people, eh? Well, anyway, so I think I'll let her go first then. Wait, who are you? The little girl came back. Will you sing us a lullaby now? Huh? What are you talking about? The demon's voice was heard laughing. Oh, she's just so precious, ain't she? Well, you heard her. Play her a lullaby. But how? I mean, I don't have any. Didn't your mother ever sing to you when you were her age? Yeah. I guess so, but... Well, how lucky for you. See, she never got to hear a lullaby. You want to know why? I was about to try and reply that I really didn't. Sadly, he wasn't actually asking. She never got to hear a lullaby because her mommy kept trying to kill her every night. Yeah, a real piece of work she was, huh? But don't bother. She's here too. The voice laughed and the little girl returned. Please sing me a lullaby, Mr. DJ Thulu. I paused for a moment, unsure completely as what the hell I was supposed to do. I don't know exactly how long I sat idle for, but it was apparently too long for whoever it was on the phone, because the next thing I knew, the air in the room started getting thick and heavy again. This time I could see my skin, even turning a bright pinkish sort of red like a sunburn. Getting hot in there, ain't it? The voice laughed again. The little girl, I heard, started to break into tears. Why won't you sing me a lullaby? My throat felt tight, choking slowly out of me. I reached out to push the answer button, which in itself felt more like a struggle than it ever should have. Why do you hate me? The screams all returned. My skin was about to start blistering and my vision was darkening again. Finally, I managed to hit the button and start, sorta, singing. Rock-a-bye, baby, in the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. And down comes baby, cradle and all. The air pressure returned to normal and I could breathe again. For a moment after, nothing happened. The other side was dead silent. Is that it? Are they finally gone? Well, ain't that just awful touching? All right, look, I sang your damn lullaby. Just pick the next song already. The voice let out a roaring laugh. Geez, kid, I'm just trying to have a bit of fun here. Not like there's anybody else in the line waiting, you know. The woman's voice was next. Play The Worlds Fall Apart by Devious Jackers. Okay. I started flipping through my records and CDs in the filing cabinet next to the panel. I don't have it. Check your playlist again. What? My playlist? On your phone. Go on, check it. I did, opening up my playlist. Right at the top was the song. My eyes widened. Wait, what the hell? I didn't buy. Oh, never mind that now. Just play it. And don't worry, it won't rack up any suspicious charges on your bank account. Just play it and I'll be gone by sunrise. Sunrise, I thought. I looked at the time. It was now 4. Another hour and a half till the sun started getting up. Of course, I wasn't exactly sure how it all worked here, but my belief was who, or whatever these jackoffs were, they'd be gone by sunrise, and this would be all over. Just another hour. I pressed the button to play the song. The song itself was almost 10 minutes long, with strung-out guitar solos and long periods of time, where the soloist just howled gutturally into the microphone. Usually, I'm all into this stuff, but this time, I couldn't tell why, but I was actually unsettled. The tune itself felt like it was traveling inside of my body, battering all of my organs around, and then forcefully pulling out my spirit, or something like that. I don't know, I'm not religious. Finally, the song ended. Bravo, DJ Thurlu! You really are the best host here, aren't you? Whatever. Just hurry up and pick the next song. You really ought to learn to relax, but as you wish. Now, I think I'm feeling generous enough to let this jackass have another turn. What do you say, ready to choose a song again? The man's voice returned again, this time, though. It was mutated, sounding like a mix of his original voice and that of the demon voice. Yes, master. I want to hear From Below by Leviathan. Like last time, I started flipping through the CDs, as well as checking my playlist on my phone. Right as I was about to tell them I didn't have it, though, there it was, appearing spontaneously at the top, above the Worlds Apart. Sighing, I hit play. The song was even more rending than the last. This song not only carried on for 3 times as long, but also didn't even feel like an actual song, but rather a weird-ass sort of ambiance. Imagine those ambiances you'd hear of, like an underwater setting or something, right? Only instead of sounding like an aquarium or anything like that, all you hear is some gigantic thing growling like it's trying to say something. Don't even bother asking me what. For 30 minutes straight, that's exactly what this song was. Weirder still, this one actually started having me seeing things. I imagined the world drowned in a red river. Blood, I presumed. With everyone in it crying out for mercy, like the voices on the other end of the radio were earlier. Then, from the river, I watched this tyrannical creature with 4 stupidly muscular arms, jagged, almost metallic-looking teeth, marbled, pitch-black eyes, and a giant maw that looked like it had swallowed the whole planet. I had no idea what it was trying to say, but I could see its mouth move in accordance with the garbled lyrics from the music. Not only that, but the monster seemed to be looking straight at me as it spoke. Screams then started to emit from the body of the beast, with the people having actually fused with the damn thing to form this chimerial abomination straight out of a goddamn horror movie. That was when they all screamed out to me, "We are, all of us, together!" The monster's body began to change, its slippery, scaly flesh dissolving away into that of a giant shadow that loomed over the world. The end. I remember screaming at this. Funny thing was, I wasn't even trying to scream. Yeah, I was scared. Yeah, my mind was beyond the point of no real return. But despite this, I wasn't making a conscious effort to scream, even if just out of a relax, I guess I should say that I was somehow actually forced to scream. In any case, though, I came out of it sometime later and found that the song was over. I looked at the time, 4:45 a.m. Only another 15 minutes. I wondered if I'd even last that long. Well, certainly a banger that one was, huh? I didn't respond for a good 2 or 3 minutes, still not convinced everything was back to normal again. Well, at least in the semi-general sense. Hello? You still with us there? DJ Thulu? I hit the button. Yeah, I'm here. Look, Devil's Pickins is almost over, okay? If you've got any more tracks to play, let's get him over with. Oh, Christ on a stick, you ain't kidding. It really is almost up, ain't it? Well then, it's a good thing I saved the best for last. The screams, the roaring laughter, and the sounds from the last track all combined into one as I heard the voice say for me to play something called The Deal by The Fallen. My heart froze for a second as I shakily opened the playlist to find, like the other two, that it too poofed its way to the top of the list. Fearing a lot more about what would happen if I hesitated, I panic-smashed the play button. Immediately, the speakers emitted the single, absolute most high-pitched scream that was even earthly possible. It even caused sparks to fly from both of the speakers and the panel. In seconds, the studio was filled with sparks flying like fireworks. I reached to hit the stop button when the phone itself exploded into flames. From there, the room then caught flame, engulfing the entire room in a span of only a minute. I frantically jumped up from my seat, now being free to move again, and tried jerking the door open. It was stuck, so then I tried breaking the window. Somehow, though, even hurling the chair at it with all my strength was absolutely worthless. Over the chaos, through the headphones, I could hear the abominable voice laughing. How's this for a hot single, huh? What are you doing? Let me out! Let me out! The voice laughed again. Well, now, the song ain't over yet. Now, is it? You can't do this. You have to let me go. Not until the song's over. That was our deal, remember? You play my little selection and I'll let you go. Don't worry, this is the last one, I promise. Now I'm going to enjoy the rest of this song, and you can go back to trying to beat the heat. I heard the laughing one last time before I heard the line on the other end disconnect. I looked around the room. Everything, everywhere, was swallowed in flames. I was trapped. There was nowhere I could go, nothing I could do. The flames crept teasingly closer, slowly toward me. Smoke now infested the air, suffocating me further. In seconds, I was gagging and wheezing. My vision clouded over, my arms and legs lost strength, and darkness spread across the room, and then there was nothing. I couldn't see, feel, smell, or hear anything. It stayed like this for God only knows how long. And I'd have thought for sure that I was dead if it weren't for the fact that I was shaken awake by a firefighter. My vision was blurry. My head felt like a sack of bricks that had been taken upside at full force. Well, where? Easy there, son, said the fireman. Just breathe. I tried to, and it resulted in a whooping cough. He then gently fitted an oxygen mask on my face. Here, now try. It was still a bit before I was able to, but I was able to start eventually breathing properly again. When the police arrived, along with my boss, the producer of the station, I was almost instantly barraged with questions along the lines of, what in the unholy hell happened in the studio? I'd have laughed at that if only out of sheer morbid irony, but of course the condition of my lungs wouldn't have allowed for that. And obviously, no, I didn't try explaining what any of that was that happened. Instead, I just told him that the equipment caught fire, the door and the window somehow got stuck. Being honest, if it weren't for the email I just got a few hours later when I got home, I'd have probably believed that. As it was, I found out that my survival was thanks to a random tip from a deep-voiced fellow. As one cheeky nurse put it, that they'd seen the studio building was on fire. I was rushed then to the hospital, where it was found, albeit rather quickly, that I was relatively unharmed outside of a bit of smoke inhalation, and was sent home. It was there, though, that I got an email on my computer from an email that, as far as I was aware, couldn't be real, that read as the following. Glad to know you got out of there, DJ Thulu. Can't have my favorite host getting all crispy on me just yet. After all, next Devil's Pickings night is next Friday, right? Well, gotta keep the maggots entertained till then. See you soon, Andy. Sincerely, your lucky devil. P.S. Don't worry about the studio. I'll personally see to it that it's up and running again.
The first reported incident was an alleged homicide in which a man killed 5 people in the master bedroom, dissected them in a meticulous fashion, and vanished with the lungs, vocal cord, and epiglottis of all 5 of the 5 victims. The killer, a man named James Jones, was originally apprehended at the site, but escaped during his arrest and has not been seen since. William Sunderland was reading from the file as we approached the site of the latest anomaly. We had all read the manuscript on our own, but this final part of the mission briefing was a tradition at this point. He continued. The second incident happened 3 years later. A family, the Ventellis, from out of town, bought the O'Keene residence from the bank that had taken custody after the passing of the original owner and his wife. Due to the secluded area and the nature of small-town gossip, the property had sat empty and unmonitored over those interim years, so we have very few incident reports from that time frame. Nothing more substantial than reports of lights in windows. William cleared his throat. 7 months after moving into the house, the new residents made a call to the local police, saying that they had heard someone in their home while they were sleeping. The police came out to investigate, but couldn't find any evidence of things being amiss. They decided the noise was raccoons on the roof, filed the report, and forgot about it. But over the course of the next 3 weeks, the Ventelli family would make 10 more reports covering everything from strange noises to sightings of figures moving about inside the house at night. Not sure what to make of things, but suspecting that the Ventelli family was looking to try and cash in on the history of the property, the police agreed to send out a cruiser to watch over the house at night for a while, not expecting anything to come of it. The first night of monitoring was silent. The officer on duty saw nothing, and the Ventellis didn't report anything amiss. The second night was a different matter. At around 1 a.m. on the second night of surveillance, the officer keeping watch on the house saw someone moving through the rooms of the first floor of the house. As part of the surveillance process, the Ventellis were not to go anywhere without switching on lights so that they could be seen from outside, and to differentiate them from any hostile third parties. The officer figured that someone had forgotten the rules or was just trying to get him worked up, but he still called in the sighting and then went to investigate. While on his way to the house, he saw another person moving in a window on the first floor of the house. He called this in and reported, "He's got a spear or a pole." The officer was asked if he wanted backup, and he responded that he did, and that was the last communication from the officer. When backup arrived in the form of 2 state troopers and another local officer, they searched the outside looking for their man but couldn't find him. The door at the front of the house was open, so they proceeded inside and scanned the house room by room. They didn't find anyone. They never found anyone. Later that night, 2 forensic specialists went missing in the house, and that was when we were told about the incidents on the property. The higher-ups at Gatehouse decided that this sounded like it might be in our jurisdiction, so they bought the house and the land around it. It has been 3 months since acquisition, and we'll be the first agents on scene. Any questions? It's not verified to be anomalous yet then? It could be dealing with a serial killer or some natural phenomenon? Rick asked, his glasses hanging off the tip of his nose as was normal for him. I didn't know how he could see anything like that. They weren't reading glasses. The man was very nearsighted. Despite finding his lack of proper spectacle etiquette annoying, Rick was actually easy to like. He was a little strange at times, but a nice guy. No, it is not, but the details of the disappearances are enough like other reported anomalies that we have rated this site as hot, which is why we've come with gear, William answered, nodding at the black hard cases of supplies we had brought along with us. We want to set up our test instruments inside the house and then head out to a safe distance and observe. We're assuming this anomaly will work like the others we found and will stay confined to the space inside the house. It was a strange thing about anomalies, but they tended to find borders and keep to them. I had personally been to a cave with an anomaly, a couple of other houses, and one field that was surrounded by an old barbed wire fence, and that was only a few of my jobs. In each case, the anomalous activity seemed to randomly select some otherwise inconspicuous boundary and hold to it. That was just one of a million things we didn't understand about these events. Other than the reports of shadows, is there any indication of physical manifestations inside the property? Chip was one of our armed recon escorts. He was smart, fast, and great with a rifle. I'd been on 3 missions with him so far, and he had always been on top of any threats that cropped up. We're not sure what happened to the 5 people who were slaughtered in the first incident, but we know from reports that the man who was deemed responsible claimed to have nothing to do with the deaths. You know as well as I do that the things that come out of anomalies are never nice. I think it's safe to assume that these things can physically manifest. His grim expression was mirrored in the face of all of us. The things we saw in the line of duty could never be forgotten. It's better to assume the worst in these kinds of situations, he added darkly. The file said we're doing cleanup if the site is active. Are we expecting this to be a simple research and raise operation? Laurie sounded calm and focused. We had worked 5 missions together, more than anyone else on the team, and she was the steadiest person I knew. She had a PhD in particle physics, another in anthropology with a specialization in occult histories, and a third in chemistry with a specialization in non-terrestrial elements. She also held master's degrees in astrobiology and data analytics. To top it off, she was ex-military and could knock a flea off the ass of a dog with the custom 9mm she carried on her hip. You know what I think about those. William seemed to expect this question because he had his reply all planned out. Trust me, your reports have been handed to the appropriate parties, but the consensus is that the history of successful anomaly closures outweighs the risk of theoretical complications, so we'll be gathering as much data as we safely can and then burning everything down. The van dropped over a steep hill and I felt an unpleasant lurching in my stomach that stuck with me even after the vehicle had settled again. Great. One more reason to feel terrible, I thought to myself. I wasn't sure where I stood on the closure issue. So far, studying and then destroying the sites had shut down all of the anomalies we'd encountered, with the exception of the sinkhole at Site 73 and the cabin at Site 8. Site 73 refused to be closed. No matter what was placed over the opening of the sinkhole, the material degraded and collapsed within a few hours. Additionally, those responsible for attempting to block the sinkhole often became violently and sometimes fatally sick. The cabin at Site 8 rebuilt itself. We tried knocking it down with bulldozers, blowing it up with C4, burning it to the ground, dropping explosives on it, removing the building in its entirety from the property, and encasing the whole thing in molten aluminum. The cabin always returned unharmed, and there was never any witness to how it happened. People left to observe fell asleep. Cameras crackled out. Drones fell out of the sky. An entire group of 100 armed men marched out of the woods in a trance and couldn't remember why. In the cases of these unbreakable anomalies, we simply bought up the land and set up a perimeter. It was the most you could do. Any other questions? William looked at each of us. We hadn't heard from Shauna or Clay, but the file didn't leave a lot of room for questions. Shauna was our second armed recon. I hadn't been on a mission with her before, but I knew she was experienced. Clay was the newest member of the current team, but even he had been out to 4 sites. I was glad to be running with experienced people. Everyone had to get their feet wet somehow, but I didn't like having to drag legless torsos out of the water because the water turned out to be corrosive acid. I only wished that was an exaggeration. People who messed up sometimes came home in sandwich baggies. I'd once asked the man who was training me, "Why do these things do this to us?" He had just offered a gruff laugh and said, "Why do the stars shine? It's just what they do. These things hate Ed. It's just what they do." At the time, I'd had it in my head to tell him that the stars shine because they had at some point, billions of years ago, been in the throes of nuclear fusion, and now that light was reaching us. But I kept my mouth shut instead. I'm glad I did. The years since have given me some clarity on the matter, and frankly, my snide thought, while accurate, completely missed the point. We couldn't understand what the things from the anomalies wanted. It's impossible to fathom the thoughts of things that exist in spaces that go between the fabric of one reality and another. You just need to know that part of their existence is an animosity towards humanity that knows no bounds. There was no pleading with them, no making sense of their actions or the ways of their world. The only thing we could do was try and understand how to keep them away from us. The most frightening aspect of these phenomena were the connections. It didn't happen all the time, but occasionally we would discover strands of continuity between the different sites, repeated symbols, sightings of similar figures, direct references to other sites. It was troubling to say the least. It implied some type of organization in the madness, and that was a horror that kept me up some nights. The van pulled to a stop. "I want monitoring and command set up inside the hour." William was up already, opening the back of the van and giving us our first look at the house. I looked up at the place, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something up on the roof looking back down at me, but then I squinted and saw that it was just some kind of antenna. It was bent, and there was something hanging from it, but it was difficult to see from where I was. "Get our sat link up and connected. We're going to try and run live updates on this one," William ordered. I winced but kept it to myself. The satellite uplink system was garbage. We were piggybacking on an old high-altitude systems that were already stressed with other business. Even with a solid connection to the satellite, which was iffy, keeping a consistent uplink speed was nearly impossible. Still, this was my job, so I'd do what I could. The equipment was in black cases, and as soon as the floor panels were down, I got to unpacking and setting things up immediately. Some of the others were starting to assemble the tent over the top of us. Once command was up, I ran the dish outside and began trying to get a fix on our satellite. I used a compass to get the coordinates and waited for the connection to come up. It didn't. I tried a few more times and then, with a frustrated sigh, moved on to my next task. "I'm ready to go in," I told William, collecting the boxes of equipment I needed for surveillance. I hated this part of the job. Entering anomalous sites was always dangerous. It had been years since we had proven that these locations drew energy from living beings within their sphere of influence. Not only did it slowly sap those who entered, but it began working on you immediately, distorting your thoughts and reasoning. We still hadn't determined if this was some kind of targeted attack or if it was just a natural effect that anomalies had on human minds and bodies. I was inclined to believe it was intentional. Once you had felt the sinister touch of these otherworldly manifestations, it became increasingly difficult not to sense a dark intent. Either way, certain drugs could be used to ease the effect on your mind. They were addictive and not great for your health, so we generally reserved them for more dangerous situations. Shauna and Chip followed me as I moved towards the door of the home. The steps up onto the small front stoop were shallow, but I took them slow anyway. Going into a place that was being twisted by an anomaly often felt unpleasant. Sometimes your stomach would lurch, or you'd feel a wave of depression and worry. But I didn't get that as I moved closer to the door. At least no more than I already felt it. And that was likely just jitters. As I stepped towards the door, it swung open on its own. Far too fast to have been drawn by the wind, and the door was supposed to be locked. "Fucking great," Chip sighed. I love it when they start messing with you right away. I reached out and opened the screen door, sliding the lock on the hinge into place so it would stay open. The main door was wide open now. I switched on the flashlight attached to my vest and spilled the glow of warmed LED light across the entryway. The door opened into a hall with stairs along one side and rooms to either side. Looking back through the house, I could see the kitchen at the far end. The place was still furnished, left exactly as it had been on the last day it had held people. Apparently, no one wanted to come back for the furniture. Smart folks. I stepped inside, expecting to feel something on crossing the threshold into Anomaly space, but there was nothing. I frowned, surprised by such a lackluster entrance from a place that had opened its own door for me. It was almost worse to have things inside the home so quiet after that little bit of theatrics with the door. Either way, it didn't matter. The equipment needed to set up, and that was my job. I began to place the first sensor suite in the hall. All of the equipment I needed to get in place at each location was in a case no larger than a toaster. There were remote modules that I would deploy as well, but those were about the size of a wallet and went up easily. The main units took a little more work, and some consideration of placement, since I wanted to make sure none of the enclosed instruments would be in a place where there was interference. The hall was easy. One main unit, 2 remotes. I moved to the next room. A layer of dust had settled over everything, but otherwise things looked normal. This could have been anyone's house, but for the smell of long-term vacancy and something else. Something sweet and cloying. I knew the smell. It was associated with anomalies. My 2 armed escorts were scanning nearby doors and making sure nothing was hiding behind the furniture, and I went about setting up the next group of modules. I was constantly aware that something could happen at any moment, but I finished all of the downstairs with not so much as a wayward creak of floorboards. I hope this place turns out to be just another regular spooky house. I'm not up for a repeat of my last job. Shauna spoke quietly as we moved up the stairs. I put another portable module that would sync up with the hall sensor on the wall. You thinking of retiring? Chip asked her. Every single job, I swear, she answered, and we all laughed a little. This job was a nightmare in almost literal sense, but there was also something that drew you back to the work. Once you knew the darkness was full of monsters, it could be really difficult to turn your back on it anymore. You couldn't switch the knowledge off. Oh shit, it's him. Shauna's voice made me turn her way. She was looking at a painting hanging to one side of the landing. It looked like something that had been bought at the estate sale of a castle in Germany. It was a portrait of a pale man with an awful smile on his face. He was showing just a little of his teeth, but they seemed to be sharp between his lips, and those thin gray lips were too wide on his face. It looked like if he opened his mouth as wide as he could, it would tip the top of his head all the way back to his neck, like he had the hinged jaws of a snake. The eyes were black from pupil to sclera. His outfit was all dark tones and a formal cut, like the finery a medieval king might have worn. The background of the picture was covered in details that I couldn't make out, but they looked meticulous, penned in lines so tiny I could barely differentiate them. I reached up and thumbed my radio. Command, we have a confirmed sighting of the uncanny man. There is a painting to the left of the stairs on the second floor with a depiction of him. Is this on any of the inventories? One moment, a voice responded. Rick, I thought. I made sure my body cam was pointed at the picture, but I found myself not wanting to look into those black eyes anymore. The uncanny man was a repeating anomalous entity. He wasn't always at the site of an anomaly, but he appeared enough that we'd been taught to look out for him. He was usually seen at more dangerous locations. No, there are no paintings in the house. We have video confirmation of your sighting from your body cams. Proceed carefully. I'm moving the site status to hot active. Start level 2 precautions. Finish up quickly. William's reply was exactly what I had suspected. All of us opened a small tin case in one of the many pockets of our vests and pulled out a prepped syringe. I removed the cap on mine, pressed the needle until a tiny bit of liquid came out. I uncovered the port on my chest and injected the methylphenidate as the others did the same. The sharpened focus came on quickly, as well as that unnatural sense of clarity that made every color a little brighter and every edge a little harder. The other two switched their weapons from single fire to burst fire and released their safeties. We were now hyper alert and extra dangerous, yet that meant almost nothing if things went really wrong. We began to move from room to room, setting up the equipment. The other two were on high alert, and that allowed me to really focus my attention on what I was doing. In fact, with the drugs running through my system, I was almost hyper-fixated on the sensors as I put them up, which is probably why I noticed something strange. The temperature's getting colder as we get near to the master bedroom. I said the words out loud. It was strange that command hadn't bothered to tell us when they got the readings. How much colder? Chip asked. 12 degrees from the first room on the left side to this room here. This was the third room. It did feel a bit cooler on my face now that I thought about it. The suits we wore helped regulate body temperatures, but they didn't cover our faces or our hands. The first case took place in that room, didn't it? Shauna dipped her gun in the direction we were headed. I nodded my reply as we headed out of the room we were working in and made our way towards the master bedroom. Shauna went in first, called that the room was clear, and then Chip and I followed her. The room was empty. There wasn't so much as a single nightstand in place. I deployed my equipment quickly, finding the cool air in the room to be unsettling. I switched on the main unit once it was ready, waited for the lights to say we were all connected, and then got up. Okay, I stopped mid-sentence. Chip was standing by the door looking down the hall. Shauna wasn't in the room. Where's Shauna? I asked, expecting Chip to tell me she went ahead to clear our way, but Chip turned back to the room and I saw him start in surprise as he realized the room was empty but for the two of us and the equipment. She should be right here. I just looked away from her. I turned to look out the door, but she was standing right there by the wall. He gestured to one side of the room, next to a closet door. Shauna? I called towards the closet. There was no reply, but I hadn't anticipated there would be one. I felt a terrible chill go up my spine, and it had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Chip walked over to the door slowly, keeping his gun trained on it. He reached out, taking the handle firmly in his grip, looked at me, then looked back at the door. He threw it open and brought his weapon up, barrel pointed inside. It was empty. On the back wall of the closet, someone had painted a large spiral with a diamond-shaped head at the outer edge of its winding path. It looked like a snake or a flatworm. I'd seen the symbol before, but no one was sure what it meant. The radio beeped. Shauna is gone. William's voice had a strained timbre to it. Chip responded quickly. We've lost visual on Shauna. She has been vanished. There was a short pause, and when William came back on, Copy? Return to command. Copy, Chip replied, and then we were rushing for the exit. Chip was in front, scanning the area with eyes that were hyper alert. I was not far behind him. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see either Shauna or whatever had taken her away. There was nothing. We crossed the threshold of the door, leaving it open in case Shauna did come after us. I unstopped the screen door and let that fall closed at our back, feeling like I needed to at least put something between us and the house. Once outside, we turned our attention to the van and the command tent, and that was when things became even worse. The tent was destroyed, but the bodies of our friends were skewered on the heavy corner posts as though something huge had picked them up and slammed them face first onto the stakes. The sight of it made every part of me recoil in horror. I felt sick. How had this happened? Anomalies didn't spread outside of their confines. I'd been on enough missions to know when I should be safe, and I should have been safe out on that front lawn. But clearly I wasn't. What the hell's going on? Chip's voice sounded as strained as I felt. You can't leave it. Once it knows you exist, it will never let you go. The voice from behind us had me spinning on my heels. There was a man standing just inside the door. It took me a moment to figure out who he was because I'd only ever seen him in pictures, and the pictures I had seen had been of a very different version of this man. The one before me was covered in scars, as though his whole body had been dragged over a field of razor blades. The skin on his back had been cut into strips and then stretched and hung on bits of iron rods that were twisted into his neck and shoulders, spreading them open like flesh wings that rose just above his head. "Mr. Jones, why don't you come out here and we'll get in the van and we can take you to a hospital, get you some help." How I managed to sound calm was a miracle. James laughed and started backing back into the house. "No, they've had enough of me for now. It's your turn. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have come here." Chip was already at the van with the sat phone. I could see the dead signal light on the side of the device, but Chip was clearly planning on leaving a repeating message. "Gatehouse, this is Site 147. We have multiple team members down and are starting evac. Repeat, multiple team members down. Evac in process." I turned and started to head for the driver's side of the van. We needed to leave immediately. The mission was awash. If the anomaly had spread beyond the house, then there was no telling where the actual border was. I was most of the way around the van when a man in black finery stepped out from behind the vehicle, and I drew up short. "Oh, no, 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 no." His voice was smooth and deep. "You can't just leave without meeting your host." The uncanny man's eyes were so dark that I felt like I was falling into them as I met his gaze, as though everything was falling into them, and it hurt. I had never known that fear could hit a person so hard. My entire body felt numb with it. I thought I might drop dead. I almost wanted to. I heard the sound of a burst of automatic fire from behind me. It startled me back to clarity for a moment, and I looked that way, expecting to see Chip taking up aim on the horror in front of me. But instead, I turned to see Chip crumpling to the ground with most of his head missing. "The weak ones are no fun." That smooth voice crept into my ears again, and I turned back. It was closer now, smiling with a grin that was terrible and wide. There were so many teeth. It was hungry. So hungry. "You aren't weak, are you? Let's go meet the king. The worm is famished." It reached out for me, and reality splintered with my mind.
Lenny had been dead more than a week and was not a pleasant sight, lying in a field of parched grass, baked and bloated under the pitiless July sun, when Sheriff Dandy finally received enough angry phone calls to incite his begrudgingly dragging his ample behind off his customary stool down at Kathy's diner and out to Floyd Erickson's place to see about arrangements. Floyd was not friendly at the best of times, as everyone in town knew. The sheriff was expecting him to be more cantankerous than usual, too, what with his grief and all. The old cuss was still a human being, though, Dandy thought as he drove, and people do have feelings to consider. He knew this would require a defter hand in his usual responsibilities, but knew also it simply had to be addressed. He couldn't take those phone calls. It wasn't like Lenny had been a dog. That would have been different, Dandy reasoned, stepping from his cruiser. No sirree. A dog was something else entirely. But Lenny was a horse. Had been a horse, that is. Lenny wasn't much of anything anymore, except a quickly putrefying mound of rotten meat that was upsetting a lot of people enough to make them bother him. Something had to be done. The sheriff hadn't moved more than 10 paces from his car when the smell hit him like a runaway Mack truck on a slick wintertime road. It was a powerful odor, as if every nasty smell that had ever snuck up Dandy's nose had been sweltering for years at the bottom of a bag of soiled diapers someplace, and then decided to leap up altogether and bear-hug his face. Dandy tried to catch his breath without actually breathing. It was a chore. He eventually settled for short, shallow gasps and forcibly gulped down a bag as he climbed the stairs to the porch. The sheriff knocked, noting the peeling paint, loose boards, and Christmas lights, months overdue for removal that maimed the house like infected sores. Not long ago, such disorder would be unthinkable at the Erickson place. That had been before Helen passed, though. Except for a monthly trip to the grocery and feed stores, Floyd didn't hardly come into town anymore. It was for the best. When he had still been making a pretense of socialization, Floyd would stop at Elky's Tavern once in a while, and it always ended in a call to Dandy. The skinny old man was surprisingly destructive after a few whiskeys when he took a notion to be. Lately, that seemed to be the only kind of notion Floyd had. Dandy knocked again and spat over the porch railing, trying to get the taste of rot out of his mouth. It did not work. He sucked a few more wispy breaths, and then a shout like a whip crack came from behind and made him jump.
"What you want, Dandy?"
"Lord, Floyd!" Dandy gasped/gagged. "You scared the daylights out of me."
"What you want?"
the old man said again from the bottom of the porch steps. He wore ratty jeans and a white T-shirt stained yellow at the center of his sunken chest and under his wiry arms. A faded trucker cap was pulled low, shading his glare. "I just came by to see how you are." Dandy's words were slick and slimy in his polluted mouth. "Haven't seen you around town."
"Fine."
Floyd stamped up the stairs and stood aggressively close.
"Everything's wonderful here."
Dandy took a half-step back and bumped his large behind into the shaky porch railing.
"So glad to hear it. Will you be coming into town for the parade?"
Beneath the bill of his cap, Floyd's right eye began to twitch. Once upon a time, the idea of a Founders' Day parade without Lenny riding proudly in the back of Floyd's truck, the horse clad in his customary Uncle Sam hat and fake beard, would have been as unthinkable as the current state of the old man's porch. But now Dandy was simply groping for some kind of icebreaker to get this chat started off on the right foot, if that was even possible.
"It might be good for you,"
the sheriff said to Floyd's silence, sweating profusely beneath the old man's stare. He took off his hat and wiped his brow with the back of his meaty forearm, shifting from one uncomfortable foot to the other. Floyd ran a hand over his unshaven face.
"Good for me,"
he repeated slowly.
"It might also be good for me, Sheriff, if you'd get yourself back to that diner stool and let me bury my horse."
Dandy sighed, then immediately regretted it, as the taste grew suddenly much worse, and said as politely as he could,
"I told you already, Floyd. You can't bury an animal that size in this state. It's illegal. Something about contaminating groundwater or something. I don't know for sure, but you can't. You got to call that number I gave you." "It's my property. It's my horse."
"I understand that, Floyd, but people are complaining about the smell. It's pretty bad, don't you think? It's a health concern. If you don't call that number, I'm going to have to do it for you."
"Complaining?"
Floyd gave an ugly chuckle.
"You've been getting bothered, Sheriff? A few phone calls keeping you from your afternoon pie?"
Dandy straightened up and slapped the hat on his thigh.
"Now see here, Floyd. I'm real sorry about your wife. Everybody is. That's why we've been letting you carry on this way. And I'm real sorry about Lenny. I know you loved that critter. You've had a damn rough go of things these last few years, and it just ain't fair. But the law's the law."
Floyd tipped his hat back, and his scowl searched the horizon.
"It's all gone wrong."
"I know, Floyd, but sometimes there ain't no reason for things. It's nobody's fault."
"Bull,"
the old man sneered, tugging his hat brim down, all business again.
"The corn wilts in the field when I done everything just the way I always have, and it's my fault. I gotta tuck tail and live on food stamps. Watch my wife go without.
Then Helen rots away, and they say it ain't nobody's fault. I still got a whole heap of bills from those smart-ass doctors.
Floyd stuffed his hands violently into his pockets as if to keep from hitting something.
It's this damn town. It's the rotten soul of this place people are smelling, Sheriff. Not my horse. Now get off my porch and leave me be.
Dandy, seeing this was not going to end well if he pushed the matter today, put on his hat, hitched up his belt, and moved to the steps.
Okay, Floyd, but if Lindy's not gone in 2 days, I'm going to have to make that call. Understand?
To the sheriff's back, the old man said,
I understand you just fine.
As the cop car pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust hovering in its wake like a dirty mist, Floyd moved his attention from its diminishing silhouette to the dark lump in the field that had once been Lenny. Small figures hovered in the air, darting in to snatch him away one piece at a time. Vultures. They had begun to gather days ago, before Lenny had even died. A horde of the gloomy, hunched birds dotted the fence on the far side of the field now, watching Floyd's every move with eerie patience.
Scavengers gotta eat too,
Floyd thought as he reached for the pistol tucked into the back of his jeans.
But not yet.
He pulled the slide back and thumbed the safety off as he walked down the stairs.
Not yet.
The remains of Lenny were not in the field when Dandy drove by 2 days later. He lowered his window a crack, and only the faintest remnant of the terrible smell remained in the air, drifting up from the dirt like campfire smoke from a pair of Levi's after a cookout. Floyd was nowhere to be seen either, a fact for which Dandy was equally thankful. Truth be told, the old man scared him. There was something in his eyes a few shades darker than simple anger when he spoke, something more terrible than grief in his voice when he said, I understand you just fine. Dandy could see where the old man was coming from. The county had changed, but Dandy believed the man had to learn to roll with the change if he was to survive his trek through this crazy world. The Erickson spread had once been the outskirts of town, but now the houses and shops and gas stations had spread out like spilled beer around a bowl of pretzels. The land that had once belonged to small farm operations had been picked up cheap by city folks with city money. They loved living in the country, thought it was real quaint. The new highway and businesses had eagerly followed their rural migration. Lordly estates had sprung up like weeds. 2- and 3-car garages, big swimming pools, and driveways the size of parking lots now dominated what was once pasture. It was good for property values, but the farmers who had been struggling to make their payments as it was quickly learned it was easier and more profitable for the banks to foreclose, roust them, and sell the land to a lawyer looking for a house with a big yard. These new folks liked the idea of the country, Dandy had quickly learned, but not the reality. They loved the farms that lined the picturesque horizons, but they despised the smell of fertilizer and the noisy work that started early on weekends. They complained loudly, and they complained to Dandy. The sheriff turned the car around and headed back to town. At least the old man had come around. His threat to Floyd had been a bluff he had not looked forward to being called on. It was the air of desperation, Dandy decided, that made the guy so unsettling. He was old, with nothing left to lose, and that was a dangerous creature. Even fat, simple Sheriff Dandy knew that. Floyd watched the cruiser turn around and drive away, peeking out from between the barn doors. He saw the sheriff's big head in the window, chins jiggling with each bounce. Floyd slowly returned to the rancid dark, whistling an old work song his father had taught him long ago. A pleasant song, his old man had said, can make even the worst job go quicker. Floyd, now an old man himself and not as strong as he once was, hoped that was true. He had bad business ahead of him today. Though it had always proven accurate,
He had never tested his father's theory quite this severely before. In the center of the barn, beneath plastic tarps, Lenny festered. The tarps muted the smell. It all but disappeared outside in the breeze, but in the barn the air was still pretty horrid. Flies buzzed in thick black clouds around the large murky room like shadows come to life. Floyd readjusted the bandana around his mouth and nose, but they found his eyes quickly and worried his face as he set to work. His tools were spread on the table near the wall, neatly arranged. He was a stickler for order. Helen had nagged that trait into him early in their marriage. It was one more thing he hadn't realized she had done for him until it was too late to thank her. He pushed the thought of his wife away. There was no room for good memories in that nasty darkness of the barn. He didn't want those beloved recollections infected with the budding memories of what he was about to do, like wiggling maggots in a once-prime steak.
Plenty of time for memory lane later, he thought. Now, I gotta get ready for Main Street.
Because whatever else the stupid cop had said, he had been right about one thing. Floyd was going to attend the parade. It would indeed be good for him. Lenny was coming too, of course. The silly old horse had loved the parade even more than Floyd. He wouldn't miss it, not over his dead body. With a precariously tall tower of soft serve rising out of a waffle cone in one hand and an extra-large cup of lemonade in the other, Sheriff Dandy returned the waves of the citizens rushing by with friendly nods, keeping his hand steady and his refreshments within easy reach of his mouth as he strode about the bustling streets. The Founders' Day festivities were going full tilt. Everyone zigged and zagged to stake a claim to a spot along the main drag from which to watch the parade from. A band of scruffy high school boys wrung the last few seconds from a Red Hot Chili Peppers cover, to the squealing delight of a gaggle of high school girls, as the crowd began to flow away from the stage in the parking lot of the shopping stop toward the sidewalk. The sun was out, but it was not too hot, and there had not been a single incident that merited Dandy's attention yet that morning. The streets were packed, the sidewalk jammed with excited youngsters and amiable parents pressed close. Cameras clicked. Heads were thrown back with laughter. Sun glinted from hundreds of pairs of tinted lenses on hundreds of smiling faces. All is right with the world, the sheriff thought, taking another luxurious lick of his ice cream. He had at first kept an eye out for Floyd, thinking perhaps tradition would win out and the old man would make an appearance. Now the grumpy coot was miles from Dandy's thoughts as the contented sheriff eyed the horizon and awaited, along with everyone else in town, for the start of the parade. When asked later, Dandy could never be certain if he saw the truck before he detected the smell. Many years and even more flabby pounds afterward, when he was half senile and long retired, and told his tales from a booth instead of his usual stool at Kathy's diner, Dandy could not be exactly sure when he knew something bad was about to happen. Then again, he never was much of a cop. Ask anyone else who was there, though, the ones willing to talk about it, that is, and they'll tell you it was the smell. The smell came first, then the truck, and with it, the town's first glimpse of Floyd Erickson's terrible piñata. Lenny's sagging belly hung pendulously beneath the rest of the corpse, which swayed in the golden afternoon light, suspended by heavy chains from a makeshift scaffold in the back of Floyd's truck. The old man piloted the vehicle down Main Street, well ahead of the rest of the parade, like a macabre pace car in a hellish race to nowhere. The maggoty animal's corpulent gut hung so heavily that it tore at the stretched hide that held it in, rending large crimson streaks in the faded gray coat that had once been a healthy chestnut hue. From the bottom of that fleshy sack, a tightly coiled line of wires protruded from a sutured gash. They led through the cab's small back window, a wick slithering from some abominable candle. Behind the wheel, Floyd looked neither left nor right, but straight ahead with a fixed, unblinking certainty. He steered the truck and its repugnant display slowly down the parade route before the hushed crowd, a tightly stretched smile pulling the corners of his mouth too high, his eyes too wide and shiny. Then, the carcass exploded. First, they say it swelled. The skin stretched further, the gut hung lower, and all of Lenny seemed to expand and strain against his already weakened seams like a balloon animal filled with an extra breath too many. The effect lasted less than a second, but still they remember the bulging, the ripping. Then the soggy meat gave way. What remained of the horse surrendered to the outward pressure of the explosion after Floyd punched the detonation button on the device in the seat beside him. Gore rained down on the crowd. A small amount of black powder and a simple detonator is a common enough tool to find on a farm. Floyd had used the same setup not more than 4 months prior to do away with a bothersome tree stump in his back field. It was no trouble for an industrious fellow like him to reconfigure things a bit for his final appearance in the Founders' Day parade. The truck did not so much as slow down. There were some witnesses who say Floyd did not even turn his head to enjoy the spectacle he created. He drove on, they insist, steadily and slowly as ever, leaving behind a pelting rain of offal soaking the stunned revelers. There was absolute silence as the last of the biblical precipitation fell, coating the road and the gathered masses alike. Then the screaming began. Children wailed as their blood-soaked parents grabbed them up and fled, pushing, scrambling, slipping, sliding, falling. Panic quickly took hold as incomprehensible sensations set in among the attendees. The slick warmth and the terrible stench, and the cementing of the realization of what it was they were covered in. Dandy watched it all, perfectly frozen. He was still holding his refreshments, ice cream now lathered in a thick red-black syrup that dripped from his shaking fist. Behind and slightly above the cacophony of chaos, he heard the growing call of the arriving flock become more pronounced. Up the road, Floyd in fact did spare a single glance in the mirror to watch as the first eager arrivals began to dive down upon the fleeing throng. The crows had come first, as he had guessed they would. They were the more predatory species, but the vultures would not be far behind. They had followed his truck the whole way into town. The birds would not be denied now. They would feast on what he had left for them all over the emptying streets, picking them clean like the bones of a dead Goliath, the last of a rare breed Floyd knew now to be extinct. There's no place like home,
he thought, and laughed out loud. He watched as the dark shapes congregated over the marred corpse of the town, smothered now in the remnants of his last friend. Then he shifted his gaze to the horizon and did not look back again.
Scavengers gotta eat too,
Floyd thought as he reached for the radio dial.
They get us all in the end.
Soon he knew they would get him too. There would be sirens, flashing lights in the mirror, and questions. So many questions. He'd deal with that when it came, though he doubted his answers would bring anyone much satisfaction. He had no revelations to offer, no insights. That was all still to come, though. For now, there was only the road flowing out before him like a long black river, speeding him away from bad memories and haunting failures. Not back into the past so much or off into some fantasy future, but rather sideways it took him, wrapping Floyd in a vague and comforting better version of the present. The music was loud, the day clear. For just a minute he could see Helen in the seat beside him, laughing and tossing her hair back.
She was young and pretty again, not eaten up by cancer, not sick anymore. He looked through the blood that covered the rear window and saw Lenny standing proud in his Uncle Sam getup. The dumb horse was shaking his mane as if he were laughing too. Floyd laughed along with them, rolling down the driver's window and sticking an elbow out into the wind. His shoulder was pelted by beading blood, bits of slimy flesh flying off the hood. He didn't notice. He tugged his cap low, kept his eyes on the far horizon, and left everything else to rot in his wake. That, as he had recently learned, was called progress.
Part 1. Charlie. Charlie stared down at Ocean Beach from the bluffs above, reconsidering his usual morning walk. He put in a few miles daily, no matter the weather. Today, however, a gelatinous slick of dead jellyfish covered the sands as far as the eye could see. Hundreds of pinkish-gray bodies in various stages of dissolution. It looked as though an alien invasion had taken place. Charlie wavered for a few minutes, then spotted a clear strip of sand by the water's edge and decided to go for it. He made his way down the slope, stepping carefully between beached jellies until he reached the surf line. Once there, he started walking north. Few people were out this morning. He passed a couple of teenage boys, staring in fascination at the jellies, poking them with pieces of driftwood, and daring each other to touch one with bare hands. Charlie grinned and kept walking. He'd gone about a mile when his gaze fell on something red in the sand. A smallish jellyfish, about the size of a bread plate. The pinkish-gray color around the outside gave way to an odd red hue in the center, as if lit inside by fire. He leaned over and took a closer look. It looked as though a smaller jelly had hitched a ride on the larger one. As he watched, the larger invertebrate began to slowly dissolve, leaving a little fire jewel-toned blob the size of a quarter, pulsing slowly in its remains. He'd never seen anything like it. Charlie reached out and gently prodded with a forefinger. It burned, little pinpricks of heat, and he immediately snatched his hand back. He should have known better. Damn things could still sting after they died. His finger throbbed, the pain increasing in intensity the way a burn did if you didn't get ice on it right away. He quickly knelt at the water's edge and shoved the afflicted hand into the icy surf. It didn't really help, but he figured it was better than nothing. He'd take some Advil when he got home. Charlie continued his walk, doing his best to ignore the burning, itching sensation, now spreading up his hand into his arm. Kate. Kate liked to think of her evening run as a ritual. Change into a running clothes at work, drive the short distance from the office in Dale City to Lake Merced, and do her run. She always parked off Skyline, near the edge of the zoo. It was a short jaunt from there to Ocean Beach where, on days the fog hadn't already shrouded the coast, she liked to watch the sunset before the drive home to the outer Parkside house she shared with Val. Today, however, a meeting had run a half hour longer than scheduled, and she didn't get out of work until 4:45. By the time she parked and finished her stretches, the shadows were long devouring the remaining swatches of daylight on the ground. Thin patches of fog slowly drifted in from the ocean. There were a few cars in the parking lot, but not a lot of people in sight. Kate thought briefly of skipping the run. She could go straight to the beach before the fog got too thick, watch the sun disappear into the ocean, and head home for dinner. Val would have cooked something exotic, delicious, and vegan to go with whatever organic wine she'd found at Whole Foods or Rainbow. The idea was appealing, but Kate dismissed it as quickly as it flashed into her head. She needed the ritual, both the physical release and the time it gave her for her own thoughts before heading home to the increasingly suffocating warmth of Val's love. So what if it was getting dark? The path around Lake Merced was hardly dangerous, and most of it was bordered by well-traveled streets with a consistent flow of traffic. Besides, she reasoned, if someone did bother her, she had her handy-dandy little pepper spray that dangled along with the Prius key and mini maglite on the curly phone cord wristband she wore when running. One last knee bend to get the last of the snap, crackle, and pops out of her joints, and she set off, heading south on Skyline toward John Muir Drive instead of her usual clockwise circuit. The semi-wooded shoreline of Lake Merced on Skyline would be the darkest and, let's be honest, she thought, spookiest stretch once the sun went down. It made sense to get it over with first. As usual, the first few minutes were painful until she hit her stride, letting the rhythm of one foot in front of the other fill her mind and body until the day's worries and tensions fell away. Her breathing was smooth, chest rising and falling in time with her stride, each foot connecting firmly with the ground. Her mind, on the other hand, soared above her. She'd once tried to explain to Val how running made her feel both out of herself yet totally grounded. Val had stared at her for a moment, then suggested she try yoga instead as a less confrontational grounding option. Kate lost track of time and distance as she ran. Muffled gunshots to her left told her she was passing the skeet shooting range. She'd like to try that someday, but knew Val would shit a brick at anything to do with aggressive, penile substitutes. She crossed the pedestrian bridge, her footsteps thudding hollowly against the wood. Deep, even breaths in and out matched the rhythm of her feet as she passed an elderly Chinese couple walking a St. Bernard nearly as tall as they were. The dog gave a loud woof as Kate ran by, possibly canine speak for, "You go, girl." She left the bridge onto dirt that led to a little grove. She could either go up to the paved path along Lake Merced Drive or enjoy a little nature for a few minutes longer on the subsidiary path through the trees. Something underfoot, a pebble maybe, caused Kate's right ankle to turn sharply, pain lancing sharply through the ligaments and pulling her rudely out of the state of zen she'd achieved. Shit! Dropping to one knee, Kate rubbed the side of her ankle, breathing into the pain in between muttered curses. She was only a third of the way, if that, around the circuit. It made more sense to retrace her steps back down John Muir Drive and continue along Lake Merced, but it was still about 15 minutes at a steady pace, longer with a limp. She gingerly tested her weight on the injured limb. She didn't think it was sprained, but it still hurt. I needed ice and arnica on it ASAP. She couldn't even call her wife for a lift. Val didn't have a car because she couldn't deal with the negative energy of other drivers. Kate heaved a sigh. Focusing on Val's more irritating personality quirks made her feel guilty, especially because it made her thoughts turn to Amy and stirred up a shitload of conflicted feelings that hadn't resolved themselves in over 3 years. Besides, it wouldn't make the trip back to the car any easier or less painful. She walked back across the pedestrian bridge, keeping her eyes on the ground to avoid a repeat of her accident, and, promptly, tripped over a rock, pain knifing into her twice-injured ankle. Fuck! Fuckity fuck! Kate grabbed the wooden rail on the lakeside of the bridge and balanced on her uninjured foot until the pain, a sharpened steel blade stuck in her flesh, subsided to a dull, continuous throb. Great. Just fucking great. She started limping down the path in the rapidly fading daylight. The Chinese couple and their dog were nowhere in sight. Too bad. She could have used some friendly canine encouragement about now. What she could use was her cell phone. Or, better yet, a car that'd come when she whistled, like a faithful horse out of an old western. She'd help. That single word, somewhere between a moan and a gurgle, cut through her thoughts. She stopped mid-limp, ears cocked for more, but heard nothing. The sound had come from her right, where a short but steep incline descended to a sandy beach and the lake itself. Willows and rushes obscured the water. Portions of it were blocked off with yellow police tape, something to do with the restoration of the banks, although it looked more like a crime scene. Kate moved closer to the tape and stared down into the shadows. She listened for a moment, but the only sound she heard was the faint barking of a dog, off in the distance. She shook her head and set off in gimp mode again. Please. This time the word rose and fell in a glissando, fading out in a sibilant hiss, like someone expelling his or her last breath. The hair at the nape of Kate's neck stood on end. Hello? Is anyone down there? A low moan answered her, the sound of someone in pain. Then a splash sounded, as if something or someone had fallen into the water, followed by a faint mewling. Oh, jeez. Kate looked up and down the path and across the street. The sun had been all but swallowed by the night sky, and there was no one in sight. No joggers, pedestrians, and this was even weirder, no cars driving by. She could hear them in the distance, see headlights over on Lake Merced, but John Muir Drive was empty of moving traffic, for the first time in Kate's memory. It also seemed much darker than it should be. The sky on the other side of Lake Merced was still fading into cobalt blue. Why was the sky over the lake itself onyx? Fog continued to drift in from the ocean, pale gray tendrils creeping over the water to insinuate themselves in and around the foliage, growing thickly along the perimeter of the lake. The water itself had a strange, oily sheen. She looked down the incline into the darkness again. Look, I'm gonna go get help, okay? There are apartments right down the street and... The word ended in a gurgling rattle. The words death rattle blinked with Vegas-like neon intensity in Kate's mind. Shit. There was only one option her conscience would accept. That was to go down there, in the dark, by herself, and help whoever was down there before things got worse. She took a deep breath. Okay, I'm coming down, you just try to hang on, okay? Clicking on her mini-mag, Kate was rewarded with a thin ray of light, laughable when compared to the darkness waiting below. Fuckity fuck. The obscenities muttered underneath her breath provided the same temporary courage as a shot of booze. She took a deep breath and ducked under the yellow tape. Earth crumbled beneath Kate's feet as she picked her way down the embankment. The edges of the mag's beam seemed to bleed off into the shadows, swallowed up by the encroaching fog. Kate shook her head. She didn't need bullshit thoughts like that running through her mind. As if on cue, another piteous mewl came from the lake edge, followed by a series of splashes, the sound of someone struggling in the water. Startled, Kate took a misstep and slid down the rest of the slope into the reeds and sandy beach below. It was only a few feet, but the landing jarred her already abused ankle, and Kate let out a shriek that would have flushed birds from the reeds, had there been any in hiding. Even through the knifing pain, Kate was aware of the unnatural stillness around her, blanketed by fog, which had thickened dramatically since she'd taken her unfortunate tumble, and surrounded by the thickets of reeds both in and out of the water. The little beach seemed to be a world of its own. Kate stood up, stifling another yelp as her ankle threatened to give out. She immediately shifted her weight to the other foot, wondering how she was going to help someone else when she couldn't even stand on her own. A single splash sounded directly in front of her. Kate shone her maglite toward the sound and gasped. An arm rose out of the water in reeds, tattered bits of cloth hanging off the bicep, hand opening and closing as it stretched beseechingly toward the shore. The skin had the same unpleasant oily sheen to it as the water itself. Shit. Keeping the mag beam focused on the arm, Kate limped as fast as she could to the water's edge. Despite the urgency of the situation, she hesitated. The lake looked like one of the La Brea tar pits. As if on cue, a nasty bubble rose to the surface and burst, releasing a foul odor, the sickly sweet smell of putrefied flesh. Oh God. Kate took an involuntary step backwards. The smell of sulfur and rotten meat crept into her nostrils. The fingers of the hand contracted inwards, then splayed out again as the arm began to sink beneath the water. Kate's insides clenched into icy knots, fear almost making her forget her pain as she forced herself forward into the cold water up to her thighs, and reached out to grasp the hand just before it vanished into the lake. She grimaced as her hand wrapped around surprisingly warm, gelatinous flesh, skin that felt like it was coated with slime. Her hand immediately began to itch and burn. She very nearly let go, but the fingers curled around her wrist like tentacles, almost jerking her headlong into the water. Kate threw her weight backwards to compensate, but whoever held her wrist used it as leverage, the fingers slowly crawling up her forearm to her bicep. Kate knew she should help, but a more primitive portion of her brain urged her to run. Instead, she stood there, maglite directed at the head and shoulders rising from the lake, the beam showing dark hair plastered to the scalp and obscuring the face, chin tucked down towards the chest. The person lifted their head directly into the light, diffused by the swirling fog. Kate stared in shocked paralysis, unable to react to the horror before her. Its skin was covered with a translucent, jelly-like substance. Features could be seen underneath the gunk, but parts of the face, neck, and shoulders were missing. Chunks of flesh and bone, including the nose, had been replaced by the jelly, as if it had eaten away the flesh beneath, and was now trying to reshape itself into human form. Nasal cavities and empty eye sockets were visible beneath the gelatinous goo. Help! The word ended in another rattling gurgle. Kate's paralysis broke, and her shriek ripped through the air as she yanked herself free from the grasping fingers, flesh and slime sloughing off the digits as they slid off her arm. Stumbling backward through the water, she turned to run and found herself in a slow-motion nightmare as the silt of the lake bottom sucked at her feet. She could hear the nightmare thing splashing behind her, emitting little mewling sounds Kate unconsciously echoed as she reached dry land. Her ankle flared with white-hot fire each step up the sandy beach. She ignored it. Running on shards of bone was preferable to facing the thing floundering out of the water behind her. Kate's maglite dangled unheeded from her arm as she plowed through the sand and reeds to the crumbling incline leading back to John Muir Drive and Sanity. The earth disintegrated beneath her feet as she struggled to climb to safety. She fell heavily onto her knees, digging her hands into the ground above as she tried to pull herself upwards. Clumps of dirt and plants came away as she scrabbled for purchase. She started sliding backwards, reaching out blindly in a frantic attempt to stop the descent. Her fingers closed around the base of a bush, its roots solidly planted. It held her weight, and she began to haul herself up again. gaining footing with her uninjured leg. She looked up, saw the yellow tape and police barricade. Safety was just a few feet away. She clutched another clump of foliage, and she gained another foot. Just a few more feet. Just a few more. Hell. The word trailed off in a wet, bubbling sigh that carried the smell of death. Kate finally found breath to scream as slimy fingers dug into her abused flesh with mechanical brutality and yanked her back toward the beach, her skin burning where the fingers grasped her ankle. It was like being caught in a taffy pull, her body stretched beyond endurance. She held onto the bush and her sanity with desperate panic. The thing, now clutching both of her ankles, pulled again. The bush came out by its roots. Kate's face slammed into the ground and her fingers scrabbled frantically for purchase, but the nightmare's grip was implacable. Dirt muffled Kate's screams as she was dragged inexorably down and into the water. Part 2. Artie. My name's Artemis Chase. It's Artie for short. I find things that are missing. People, things, even places. All sorts of things. Sometimes it's a precious family heirloom gone missing. Sometimes an idea. Sometimes it's a life. Don't ask. It gets weird. Sometimes, whatever or whoever it is doesn't want to be found. Thing is, once I start a hunt, I finish it. It's what I do. It's what I've always done. But it doesn't always end well. It was a quiet day at the office. Not that I minded so much. My office was in the ground floor of my house, a cute bungalow in Venice Beach, on one of the streets overlooking the canals. When business was slow, I'd kick back on my porch with a cup of coffee and people watch, something I never tired of doing. You learn a lot from unobtrusive observation and eavesdropping. No people to spy on this morning, but a mama duck and her babies paddling in the water kept me entertained while I sipped rich, dark coffee from my favorite mug, a jumbo-sized thing with the words, "I like my coffee the way I like my elder gods, dark, powerful, and eternal," and munched on warm cinnamon donut holes. Maybe not nectar of the gods or manna from heaven, but good enough for me. My tastes have grown simpler over the years. I've mellowed. I'm less likely to smite people who piss me off. Work had been slow the past week. I didn't mind. I'm not your typical hard-boiled private dick in a trench coat and fedora. The type with a bank account flatter than his last girlfriend. Nothing but a bottle of cheap whiskey for sustenance until the next case walked through the door in the form of a dame with more curves than Lombard Street. For one thing, I'm the curvaceous dame in this equation. For another, not a fan of cheap whiskey. Blech. Still, if things didn't pick up, maybe I'd take a few days off. Drive up and stay a few days in Cambria. Do some wine tasting in Paso Robles. Take advantage of the downtime. Maybe meet someone who'd like to share a bottle or two of wine. See where it led. That'd be nice. It had been a while. The phone rang. Not my cell, but the landline. You see, only a few people have that number. People who don't use it frivolously. Close friends. People I consider family. When it rings, I answer, which meant I had to get off my ass and go inside to get it. I heaved a martyred sigh and did just that, taking my coffee with me. I dug the phone out from under a pile of paperwork and answered it. "Artie Chase? Aunt Artie?" The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my stomach did a little half flip. Something was wrong. I could tell by the quiver in the caller's voice, the way she said just those 2 words. The choked sob that immediately followed confirmed it. Val? What's wrong?
It's Kate. She didn't come home last night.
Not good, I thought. The half flip turned into a somersault, and I knew I was right. Something was deeply wrong. See, my gut always tells me if I'm on the right track. Back in the old days, all I had to do was picture something or someone, and I would know exactly where they were. Over the years, however, as I immersed myself in the various cultures and became more involved with mortals, that clarity of vision faded away bit by bit. It went from the equivalent of a searchlight shining on whatever I wanted to find, to all objects and background illuminated with the kind of bright lights found on a film set. That eventually dimmed to a spotlight, still showing enough to make it relatively easy to do my job. That eventually faded down to a beam of light shining directly on my quarry. Maybe a hint of location around the edges, but I had to depend on what I suppose would be called a sixth sense to narrow it down. It would have been nice if that manifested, say, with a nice tingling sensation or a psychic light bulb going on over my head. Instead, I got indigestion, and all the Tums in the world didn't help. I sat down, letting the donut hole settle back into place. Val is my niece, for lack of a better term. You'd have to add on a few dozen greats in front of aunt to be even close to the truth, but who's counting? Suffice to say, Val's mom and I have some history, and Val had grown up thinking me as part of the family. She's always been sweet, but strong-willed, usually got her own way with gentle and, sometimes irritating persistence. She'd moved from her parents' home in Beverly Hills to San Francisco as soon as she turned 18. If ever there'd been a flower child of the 60s born a few decades after the fact, it's Val. I've always liked her wife, Kate. Pretty, with a whip-thin human greyhound build of a dedicated runner. Opinionated and direct. A good counterbalance to Val's sweetly passive-aggressive personality. Although, when I'd spent time with the two of them, it was obvious that Val ran the show.
Did you two have an argument?
Another sniffle followed by an incongruously loud nose blow. Then, a long pause. Val? You there?
No,
she finally answered.
I mean, yeah, I'm here, but no, we didn't have an argument, at least.
She trailed off. I waited.
We'd argued the night before. Nothing serious, but we went to bed without talking it out. We've had arguments before, but she never made me worry. She knew what Mom and I went through with Dad, you know?
She gave a shaky laugh.
I swear, I still don't know what made him clean up his act, but it saved Mom's life, you know?
I knew what had convinced him to change. I'd found his conscience and forced him to take it back. But she didn't need to know the ugly details. Tell me what happened, I said.
She called me from work, said she was going for her run around Lake Merced, and that she'd come home as soon as she was done.
My mind switched into professional mode. And what time was this?
When she called, maybe 4:30.
And what time did she say she'd be home?
No specific time,
Val replied.
I didn't expect her until maybe a little after 6. She liked to watch the sunset from the cliffs above the beach when she was finished. She didn't always go there, but last night...
Val choked back another sob before continuing.
The sunset was beautiful. I think she would have gone there if...
She stopped. I could almost see all the horrifying movie trailers playing in her brain.
She didn't make plans to go out with her friends? Maybe forget to tell you? No, Kate wouldn't do that. I made a non-committal noise. I can't tell you how often I've heard a variation on this particular theme of denial, and how many times it turns out to be total bullshit. But I let it go, for now. She didn't come home, didn't call, nothing. When I tried calling her, I got voicemail. So I drove to Lake Merced, checked the lots and cars parked in the street. And I found a Prius parked near the zoo. Her keys were gone, but her phone was in the charger. You called the cops, right? They sent someone out to check the areas off the path in case she'd fallen or something. They found her keychain. Did they check the beach? They checked there first. I went to Java Beach to see if she'd stop for coffee. She goes there regularly. They hadn't seen her. This did not sound good. Another pause, then... Aunt Artie, will you please come up? Yeah, I said. I'll be there in a few hours. I set the receiver gently back in its cradle. I have one of those retro rotary dial phones. Call me old-fashioned, but not everything new is as cool-looking as its predecessors. If you look closely around my office or my home, you'll find lots of cool-looking things. Some, like the phone, are replicas. Others are genuine antiques, going back as far as, well, let's just say the little marble statue of Apollo is older than a lot of cities. I was there when it was carved, back when Roman numerals were used for more than just book indexes. Still, all the retro chic in the world wasn't as convenient as my iPhone when it came to numbers on speed dial. I went back out on the porch where Mama Duck and her offspring were still idly paddling in the canal and used my cell phone to book the flight from LAX to SFO. I used the hour before boarding to check the local news for the past few days in the Bay Area, seeing if anything struck a nerve. The first thing that caught my eye was a spread about jellyfish covering the beach. According to the article, while this was considered unusual, it was not unheard of. I had my own opinion on the subject, and if I was right, it did not bode well for Kate. Next, I call a friend with the SFPD. He heads up the Night Stalkers. Like Los Angeles, San Francisco's police force had a department that specialized in cases involving things that most people don't know, or want to believe, exist. Michael picked up after a couple rings. "Stebbins," he growled. His tone said, "Make it quick, and you better not be wasting my time." "Michael, it's Artie." "Hey, Chase." His tone warmed up fractionally. "How's life in La La Land?" Michael has the attitude that if you live in San Francisco, you're one of the chosen people. If you live in Los Angeles, however, you're just stupid. I never argued the point. "Everyone's singing and dancing in the streets, as per usual," I replied. "Figured. What do you need?" One of the things I like about Michael is his ability to cut to the chase. No pun intended. He and I both prefer to jump into cold water because inching in bit by icy bit only prolongs the unpleasantness. "I'm looking for anyone who's gone missing since the little jellyfish incursion on Ocean Beach 2 days ago." A pause followed. A real pregnant pause, waiting to give birth to something vile and smelling of rotting flesh. "Are you thinking of Koros, Demon?" Michael sounded like he really hoped my answer would be no. I hated to disappoint him. "Afraid so." "Shit." "Yeah." "Shit," he said again. Then, "If you're right, we need to get on this. I'll call you back in 10. He hung up without another word. I didn't mind. There's a time for niceties and a time for action. If we had a Koros in the Bay Area, option number 2 was the only choice. Koros demons are the stuff of nightmares. They need a warm-blooded host body. When they find one, they seep into the pores of the skin,
slowly dissolving and feeding off the innards as they take control of their unwilling incubators, using them as temporary vessels. The victims are aware of what is happening, but are unable to stop it or control their own bodies. When the structural integrity is compromised past the point of usefulness, the Koros finds another host body and transfers its essence, leaving its previous victim to die. In the meantime, it infects anyone it touches, and those victims can infect others before they die a hideous, painful death. Yeah, real nasty shit. Luckily, there's only one known Koros demon still alive, somewhere in the waters on the western seaboard. It rarely spawned, maybe once every 100 years or so, and when it did, the odds were heavily stacked against any of its offspring making it to shore. The temperature change in the water when a Koros gives birth can be extreme. It creates shifts in the tides, changes the currents, and can really fuck up the day of the local aquatic population in the vicinity. Most sea creatures have some sort of sixth sense that tells them to get the hell away before things heated up. Jellyfish, on the other hand, don't have much in the way of brain cells. And while a Koros larva can't last long without a warm-blooded host, it was possible one of the little bastards had hitched a ride on a jelly onto Ocean Beach. 9 minutes and 54 seconds later, Michael called me back. 2 people so far. One of them is Kate Banks. That wasn't a question, was it? No. He waited for me to elaborate. When I didn't, he continued. The other is Charlie Fong. According to his wife, he went out for his usual walk early Sunday morning. Same morning the jellyfish showed up. Yeah. Charlie met a friend for lunch at the boathouse near Lake Merced later the same day. Wasn't feeling well. Went to the bathroom. Didn't come out. Someone said they saw him heading towards the water. And? That's the last time he was seen. And Kate went missing Monday late afternoon. Her keychain found next to the lake. Oh, so not good. My flight was announced over the loudspeaker. I'm on my way, I said. My turn to hang up. I caught another lift from the airport to Val and Kate's house on Lawton and 45th, a few blocks from Golden Gate Park. A lot of the houses were painted in pastel shades, probably to minimize the obvious damage of sandblasting from periodic high winds on the nearby beach. But Val and Kate's place was a determinately vibrant lilac shade with dark plum trim. The front door opened as I raised my hand to knock. A petite, pale-skinned redhead in baggy jeans and an oversized cream-colored sweater rushed out and threw herself against me. I dropped my purse and my travel bag, folding Val in a hug, as she burst into tears. I held her until the flood of tears subsided, and then we went inside the house. The inside was painted in blues, lavenders, and pale greens. Furniture and artwork blended in, with candles and dishes of sea glass scattered with apparent artlessness on top of surfaces. It smelled of bergamot and sandalwood. Val led me upstairs to the kitchen, a cheerful room with black and white tiled flooring and seafoam green walls. It smelled of freshly brewed coffee. Val poured us both some, and we sat down at a little white table that screamed shabby chic. "Thank you so much for coming, Aunt Artie," she said. Her huge green eyes were shadowed, sunken in their sockets. "Did you get any sleep last night?" I asked, reaching out and covering one of her hands with mine. She shook her head. "No, not really. I'd drift off, but then I'd hear something and think it was Kate coming home, so..." Her voice trailed off and she took a sip of coffee. I doubted she tasted it. "Have the police been in touch since you called me?" "Yes. They didn't have any news." Not every case has a dramatic countdown to go with it. Sometimes I can take as much time as I need, get the job done right, satisfy the customer, and not end up wanting to crawl inside a whiskey bottle when it was all over. Although, in my case, it's more likely a wine bottle. My gut told me this was not one of those times, and when you've been on the hunt for as long as I have, You learn to trust your gut. Val looked at me, eyes wide and hopeful. Do you know what's happened? Do you know where Kate is? Is she going to be okay? I didn't know what to say. Val believed in me, in my ability to fix things. After all, I'd come through for her family before. Problem was, if I was right about the situation, well, how could I tell her that if we found Kate, I'd probably have to kill her, if she wasn't already dead? Look, I said carefully, I think Kate may be, well, there's a good chance she's ill, not entirely herself. I felt Val's panic spike even before she spoke. Is she going to be okay? What's wrong with her? It's an infectious disease, I said, choosing my words as carefully as time and the situation allowed. Very rare. It's likely she picked it up from someone who'd got it on the beach. She's probably not thinking clearly. People with this condition will try to get to their loved ones or go to a place that has special meaning to them. Kind of like zombies in shopping malls. Kate would come home, Val said with certainty. Are you sure? I asked. Because she may not be thinking clearly. She might try to go to her parents' house, maybe even try to find her best friend in elementary school. Anything like that. There's no real way of knowing. Even as I gave those examples, though, I knew they were all dead ends. Nary a flip from my stomach. I know. Her expression was set. Her mind made up. She hated her parents. She doesn't have any siblings, and she told me she was pretty much a loner until college. What about friends in town? I persisted. An ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, maybe? As each word left my mouth, the butterflies in my stomach started. By the time I'd finished, those butterflies had turned into pterodactyls. And I could tell by the way Val's face darkened that I was onto something. No one she'd ever want to see again. I could feel my impatience growing, but I tried to keep it stuffed down. Val was hurting badly, and something told me that these questions were uncovering things that she'd tried to keep buried. Are you sure? I mean, it's possible that she— No! Val slammed her fist down on the table. She was a bitch, and the best thing Kate ever did was to leave her. Now we're getting somewhere. She? Val's lips pressed tightly together for a brief moment. Amy, the woman she was living with before we met. Was it an abusive relationship? Val nodded vehemently. Amy never hit her, but she was emotionally abusive. She was a total control freak. Kate couldn't do anything without checking with her first. She was totally under that bitch's spell. She never would have left if I hadn't gone in, packed stuff up, and moved her out when Amy was out of town. Never would have left, eh? Something told me that there was more to Kate's relationship with Amy than as viewed through Val's very specific lenses. So maybe there's unfinished business, and— It's finished! Val slammed her fists down on the table, rattling the cups. Coffee sloshed onto the linen tablecloth. She didn't notice. Val, I said as gently as I could, we don't have time for this. We need to find Kate as quickly as possible, for her sake. I didn't add that the main reason we needed to find Kate as quickly as possible was so we had a chance to contain the infection before it spread any further. We sat in silence for a moment. I drank some of the coffee, appreciating the smoothness of the blend. Then, I looked back across the table at Val, saw how fragile her facade of anger was, covering up something even more breakable. Finally, I asked, Does Amy still live in San Francisco? Val burst into tears. That answered my question. We drove to Amy's in silence. It was Val's car, a Chevy Bolt. I drove. Val hadn't spoken a word since giving me Amy's address, and I practically had to pry that out of her. Yay for Google Maps, because Val wasn't talking. And I didn't want to waste my limited stores of mana unless it was an emergency. Finding my way around San Francisco did not qualify. Mana, simply put, is energy. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. At the risk of causing a nerdgasm or two, it's kind of like the Force. There's a dark side and a light side, all depending on who's tapping into it. For every Gandhi, there's a Pol Pot. For every Kim Jong-il, there's a Nelson Mandela. For every Nat King Cole, a Justin Bieber, and so on. You get the picture. When the cosmos was created out of chaos, those of us who came into being the first 1,000,000 or so years lived on it. It's called food of the gods for a reason. When we discovered every mortal who believed in us, who offered worship and sacrifice, increased our mana, and thus our power, we fought over it, killed for it. The wars of the gods were epic. Our worshippers were pawns, sent on quests to feed the glory of his or her chosen deity. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are stories, yes, but there's a core of truth in both of them. Mortals trying to make sense of the seemingly random chaos my kind has always brought to this world. Some of us still crave the raw power that we had back in the day, reinvented themselves as believers fell away, changed their names to fit whatever mythos people believed in. Some are real bastards. Holy wars don't just start themselves, you know. Me? I finally lost interest in playing the game. It's funny, though, because even now there are still secret cults who worship the goddess I used to be. Not a lot, just enough to keep small amounts of mana flowing my way. We pulled up in front of a little alley, one of those narrow streets that's tucked in between two major thoroughfares. A pile of discarded items littered one corner, an ancient printer, a rusted mini trampoline, a suitcase that looked like it had failed the Samsonite gorilla test more than once. It looked like a junkyard had taken a crap there. The Google Maps lady told me to turn right, so I did. The houses were mostly shabby two-story Victorians painted in bright colors with contrasting trim, lime green and hot pink, turquoise and fire engine red. They'd never grow up to be painted ladies, but somehow it all worked. "It's this one," Val finally spoke, pointing to a little railroad car-style house tucked in between two larger Victorians. Stairs led up to a cement porch, the exterior painted brick red with black trim. I parked in front of the driveway and put the hazard lights on just in case the parking Nazis showed up. Val stared at the house, her discomfort screamingly obvious. I wasn't quite sure if it came from the fear that this would be a dead end, or because we might find Kate here. Maybe a little of both. "Stay in the car," I said. I got out and shut the door behind me before Val could say anything. I didn't have time to argue with her. I walked up the steps, gut churning. Some people get spidey senses. I get the psychic equivalent of indigestion, so not fair. I rang the doorbell, one of those strident noises that sounds like a robot blowing a raspberry. I heard the sound of bare feet slapping against a wooden floor. Then, the rattle of a safety chain as the door opened a crack. A heavily lashed brown eye stared at me suspiciously. "Hi," I said mildly. "I'm looking for Kate Banks." I could tell by the little shift of her pupil that Kate was there. The suspicion in that one eye deepened. "Who are you?" "My name's Artie Chase. I'm a private detective. Kate went missing last night and I'm checking with all of her friends in the area to see if she's been in contact." "Who hired you?" I thought about hedging around the question but didn't want to waste time. "Her wife." "Is she in there?" Well, hell. So much for Val staying in the car. "What the hell are you doing here?" Amy practically spat the words out. And so much for a rational conversation. Val pressed up next to me, her body vibrating with rage. "If she's in there, I need to talk to her right now." "If she was here, do you really think I'd let you in?"
She's my wife! There was no hiding the little note of triumph in Val's voice. I winced. She was not making this any easier. Yeah, well, she was my girlfriend. And you took care of that, didn't you? Look, I said, trying to take control of the situation. You can call Michael Stebbins at SFPD and check out my credentials if you want. But if you're going to do it, please do it quickly. We don't have time to waste. I think Kate might be seriously ill, and we need to get her help. Amy's gaze flickered to somewhere back in the house. The door shut long enough for her to undo the safety chain before opening from a crack to a space almost wide enough to let us in. I went first, making sure Val stayed behind me. Amy stepped back as we entered, and I got my first good look at her. Petite, like Val, but there the resemblance ended. Short, curly black hair, skin the color of coffee with cream. She wore khaki cutoffs and a tight t-shirt advertising a band called The Subtle Farts. The house had scuffed hardwood floors covered with random threadbare throw rugs. Posters from local rock venues shared wall space with some truly ugly oil paintings of random shapes and colors. The place smelled of patchouli and mildew. Look, I said, as she shut the door behind us. I'm sorry to intrude, but Amy scratched a red patch on one arm. Shit. Did she touch you? What? Amy looked both startled and offended by my question. Did she touch you? That is none of your business. Val gave a sharp intake of breath. You bitch! She lunged at Amy. Probably would have done the whole hair-pulling, face-slapping thing had I not thrust my body in between them. Don't touch her! My cry was a warning, but Val took it as a betrayal. She whirled on me. What do you mean? Do you want to be arrested? I said harshly. What I didn't say was, do you want to be infected? This bitch is hiding Kate. My wife, not hers. She has no right to keep me from her. You have no right to come into my house. Amy's voice dripped acid. You know, like you did before, sneaking in behind my back, poisoning Kate against me. Do you know what it's like to come home and find half of your life ripped away? Look in the closet and find half of it empty. All of the stuff you've collected with someone you love, just gone. The pain in her voice and eyes were raw, as if this had happened yesterday instead of 5 years ago. You drove her away, Val hissed. I just helped her find the courage to walk out the door. Talk about a battle of control freaks. The level of soap operatics would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high, and both of their pain so damn real. You don't deserve her, Amy spat. You are such a narcissist. You probably didn't even notice that she needed help. What are you talking about? I take better care of her than you ever. What kind of help? I asked, cutting Val off before she went off on another rant. You're right. She's ill, Amy said. She turned to Val. I don't know what's wrong with her, but how the hell you didn't notice before today is so fucking beyond me. You don't deserve her. Amy scratched her arm again. The red patch was growing before my eyes. The only chance she had at this point was amputation, and it would have to be done within the next 10 minutes at best. I wasn't optimistic about the odds of her agreeing to let me take her arm off. Even as I watched the spot spread further, the skin of her arm was taking on an almost spongy look. It was probably already too late, but I had to try. You've got a highly infectious disease, I said. If you don't take care of it now, you're going to be dead within 12 hours. As Amy opened her mouth to reply, a door creaked open down the dark hallway. Amy. My skin crawled. The voice was clotted, as if something thick and viscous coated her throat. Or, more likely and horribly, her larynx was starting to dissolve.
A tall, thin figure slowly made its way toward us, limbs moving with unnatural stiffness. When it finally emerged into the dimly lit front room, I knew it was too late. Kate was still mostly human. She'd been a beautiful woman with a classic Nordic type of beauty, deep blue eyes and full lips, a straight nose with a thin bridge, cheekbones that Derek Zoolander would envy, short hair the color of hammered gold. Now, the fine lines of her features were beginning to blur, the sharp planes of her cheekbones gone soft, collapsing in on themselves. The skin of her arms and legs, left bare by jogging shorts and a running bra, had an unhealthy, almost greasy sheen, as if she'd been dipped in petroleum jelly, like a corpse, going through adipocere composition.
Kate!
Val tried to shove her way past me. Kate, what was left of her, ignored Val's anguished cry. She only had eyes for Amy. I stopped her. "Don't touch her," I said quietly. "You can't."
Kate!
Val tried again, her voice entreating Kate to look at her. Still, no response.
She doesn't want you here.
Amy's smile was ugly in its triumph.
She's made her choice. I don't give a shit whether you accept it or not. Just get the fuck out of my house.
Val lunged again, this time breaking my grip. She threw herself forward, hands outstretched. Her palms slammed against her rival's chest, and Amy reeled backwards, feet slipping on the small rug, her arms pinwheeling frantically to try and keep her balance. She was too far gone, however, and fell heavily, her head striking the corner of a small table with a sickening crack. She crumpled to the floor, limbs suddenly lax. Blood seeped out of her ears and mouth. Even as I watched, the red blotch on Amy's arm collapsed in on itself as the infant Koros began to die, its host no longer feeding it. Amy. Kate tilted her head to one side. Amy didn't move. Neither did Val, frozen in place by the enormity of what she'd just done. Kate started forward, her gaze fixed unwaveringly on Amy's body. As she moved towards us, I pulled Val out of the way, keeping one arm tightly wrapped around her waist in case she tried to go to her wife again.
Kate?
Val sounded like a lost little kid, like the little girl I'd met with her mother, the two of them covered in cuts and bruises inflicted by Val's father. Kate ignored her. I could almost hear Val's heart breaking with the same sound as Amy's skull connecting with the hard wood. She didn't fight me, just stood and watched as Kate knelt by her ex-lover's side, picked up one wrist, feeling for a pulse with fingers losing their shape. She set the hand down gently, as if afraid it would break, looked around again before giving an inarticulate cry of rage and grief, the sound thick and liquid. Only then did Kate look up at her wife, her expression filled with uncomprehending sadness and fury. "You bitch," she said slowly, struggling to say the words.
Kate, I didn't...
Kate lurched to her feet, moving with sudden, deadly speed despite the damage done to her limbs. She lunged forward, hands reaching for Val, hatred blazing in her eyes. She grabbed me instead. The second Kate laid hands on me, I felt the acid of infection seeping into my skin, hitching a ride through my arteries with each beat of my heart. It would eventually spread through my entire body, eating me alive from the inside out. Or would have, had I not been who and what I am. Ignoring the scalding pain, I reached deep inside and drew on my reserves of mana. An iridescent white suffused with a golden glow of pure energy. With it, I pushed back against the infection swarming through my body. The Koros was strong, infused with the raw power of its ancient mother. I could feel the battle going on inside me. The mana continued to do its work, flowing through me, devouring the corrosion, folding it inside its raw, sweet power. It tasted of honey and stars, and I remembered what it felt like to be worshipped by thousands, what it was to be Artemis, to be Diana, to truly be the goddess of the hunt. I could see the world and beyond. I reached out, grasping Kate's hands. The mana flowed from my fingers into hers, but even as I felt it enter her system, I knew it was futile. The corrosion had wormed its way throughout her body, into her muscles, ligaments, and organs. There wasn't enough of Kate left to save. Her body began to sink in on itself as the mana destroyed the infection. I looked into her eyes, looked past the pain and lunacy to what remained of Kate Banks. I leaned in and said, "What do you want?" She looked back at me and whispered, "End." I nodded and let the mana find its way to what was left of her heart, drawing the last of the Koros infection out, slowing down the heartbeat at the same time. Kate turned her head and looked past me, one hand lifted as if reaching for something. "Kate!" Val scrambled on hands and knees to her wife's side. "I'm here, baby." Kate ignored her. "Me," she sighed, her hand dropping to the floor as her heart finally stopped. Sightless gaze fixed on her dead lover. Val gave a wail of anguish, the sound wild and desolate. I used one last burst of mana to reach out over the city, seeking for any more signs of the Koros' infection. The golden illumination quickly dimmed to a searchlight, the circle of light rapidly diminishing to a pinprick. It was enough. The Koros was dead. The infection stopped. It was over. I looked at Val, sobbing next to Kate's partially deflated corpse, and wondered how she would move on from this. She'd killed someone. It had been an accident, but it would leave its mark on her. And by doing so, she'd lost even the memory of Kate's love. I always find what I'm looking for. It's what I do. And sometimes, it just sucks.
Chilling tales for dark nights.